Chapter 1479. The world within the tower. Jianchen stared at the parts of the door condensed from energy with great interest. His eyes shone extremely brightly as he murmured, with the toughness of the Anata Tower, if the main entrance was fine, I would not be able to enter no matter what, even if it's unable to counterattack. Yet now, as soon as he finished speaking, Jianchen cleaved at the door with his sword once again. With a boom, the portion condensed from energy darkened once more. Jianchen finally got through the damaged door after more than a dozen attacks. Jianchen carefully passed through a crack in the door and entered the interior of the tower. Jianchen felt like he had arrived in a whole different world the moment he stepped into the tower. The ground was barren, without any signs of life, and filled with the presence of death. The sky was gloomy and expanded as far as the eye could see. Is this the interior of the Anata Tower? Jianchen gazed at the boundless world and could not help but feel shocked. He soon attempted to expand his soul to observe the place, but he discovered that his soul was suppressed even more within the tower. Jianchen looked around diligently for a while. He actually sensed no signs of danger within the world, so he just ended up riding the Qing Sua sword in the sky while communicating with the sword spirits. There are a total of 9 floors within the Anata Tower. Each floor is composed of a vast world. Normally, the tunnel to the floor above should be in the center of the floor, but the artifact spirit is still present and can control everything within the tower. Under its influence, it possesses the power to hide the passage to the next floor or move it to a completely new place, Ziying explained to Jianchen. This was the first time they had come inside the Anata Tower, but they knew quite a lot about it. Inanna Grand Prime was an extremely famed figure in the Saints' world as well as one of the 3 strongest Grand Primes. The Grand Exalts of the Immortals world would have obviously investigated the Anata Grand Prime. If the artifact spirit really has hidden the way up, wouldn't it be almost impossible to find in this tremendous world? After all, I can't use my soul to search here, Jianchen frowned. Master, we've already entered the tower, yet the artifact spirit still hasn't appeared. This explains one thing, which is that it is far weaker than us, where even when it's in its own territory, it's not confident it could deal with us. In its current state, perfectly hiding the way up within the damaged tower is no longer possible. We will discover it when we approach it, said Ziying. Jianchen rode the Qing Sua sword through the first floor of the tower. The Ziying sword hovered above his head, ready to strike out at any moment. Jianchen had secretly filled every inch of his body with chaotic force as well, pushing his chaotic body to the limits. Outside, he was surrounded by the glow of the way of the sword. At this moment, Jianchen narrowed his eyes. He stared ahead. Only darkness appeared before him, and within the dark world, space was extremely unstable. Huge cracks would appear one after another, and each one was thousands of meters long. They were large enough to swallow huge beasts, and they even emitted a suction force. However, an illusionary, 30,000-meter-long sword hovered within the dark world. It flickered with light as sword chi surged from it. 1,000-meter-long spatial cracks would pass through the sword from time to time, but it was unable to damage the illusionary sword at all. The cracks did not even manage to shake it. This is one of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's 4 swords, the Sword of Mortality. It's just sword chi left behind by the Sword of Mortality. The Sword of Mortality boasts being able to sever an immortal's foundation, thrusting mortality onto them and preventing them from attaining immortality ever again, explained Qing Sua. Jianchen stared at the huge projection of the Sword of Mortality. Even though it was formed from just a single strand of sword chi, it seemed everlasting, like it would not disperse even if the world ended. It seemed like the illusionary sword was eternal. Jianchen was shocked. He admired the terrifying strength of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Just a single sword chi left behind could still remain so terrifyingly powerful even after so much time. Jianchen struggled to imagine just how terrifying he actually was in his prime. This is the end of a side of the first floor. Originally, the first floor was not so small, but the space ahead has been obliterated by the sword chi of the Sword of Mortality, Ziying said. Jianchen stared at the sword. Even though it was created from a single strand of sword chi, it possessed a supreme will within the sword god realm. To his pity, He knew that his comprehension of the way of the sword would rapidly increase even if he could just understand a fraction of the will, but his comprehension was just far too low and his foundations were not firm. He did not possess the ability to comprehend the will of a sword god. After a moment of silence, Jian Chun suppressed the temptation to attempt to comprehend the will. He left in frustration and pity, flying off in another direction. Jian Chun soon arrived at another boundary of the floor. A destroyed space of darkness blocked his way again, and a huge sword hovered within that space as well. It was 30,000 meters long and radiated with a terrifying pressure. The dark space before him used to be a part of the vast world on the first floor, but it had been obliterated by the shocking sword Qi in the end. This is the Sword of Reincarnation, also one of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt swords. It possesses the power of samsara, able to push immortals into an endless cycle of rebirth, never able to break free. The voices of the sword spirits rang through Jian Chen's head. Jian Chen's interest was immediately piqued. In the world of the first floor, he had already traveled in 2 directions, and when he reached as far as he could go, he had found the illusory figure of a sword. He wondered if the other 2 directions possessed swords as well. Jian Chen did not stay for too long and immediately flew off in the one direction and then the other. His thoughts were confirmed. Just as he had expected, the boundaries of the other 2 directions possessed the sword Qi of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt as well. Each strand of sword Qi was extremely terrifying, projecting a sword that was 30,000 meters long. They seemed eternal even after so much time. The Sword of Slaughter is the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's main sword for killing as well as the one he used most frequently during his growth. Countless immortals from the immortals' world, great demons from the demons' world, and experts from the saints' world that have been felled by this sword. The Sword of Severance is the strongest sword among the 4. This sword specializes in attacking the soul and is able to sever the souls of people while leaving their bodies unscathed. Even the apex immortal exalts feared the might of this sword. Mortality, reincarnation, slaughter, and soul severance are the 4 divine swords of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Each sword has been fused with a way comprehended by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, allowing the 4 swords to possess their own unique abilities. Coupled with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's comprehension at the realm of Sword God, the 4 swords could erupt with unimaginable might. If the 4 swords formed a formation, their power would be even more shocking. The Inanna Tower is very powerful as well, truly worthy of being the Inanna Grand Prime's famed treasure. Even the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt was unable to destroy it, only managing to suppress and seal it. Ziying and Qing Suo gave one explanation after another. Their voices were filled with admiration and amazement. Chapter 1480, Spirit of the Inanna Tower, Immortal Exalt. Sword God. Jian Chen clenched his fists as anticipation filled his eyes. The power of the 4 sword Qis left behind by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt had completely taken him aback, leaving an unforgettable impression on him. Jian Chen displayed an emotion he rarely showed, desire. A desire for strength, the desire to become an immortal exalt and a sword god. If I possessed enough strength right now, the world of Forsaken Saints wouldn't be able to pose a threat to the Tianyuan continent at all. Not only can great strength be for protection, but it can also be used to protect those close to me as well as my home. In this world, if you do not have enough strength, you are nothing. You won't even be able to control your own life, Jian Chen thought. He secretly made up his mind to become powerful like the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. This was not only his desire as a fighter but also because he wanted to see what the other worlds were like up above. Jian Chen seemed to think of something and asked, Ziying, Qing Suo, the Azulite swords are like the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, the strongest god artifacts of the Immortals world. Each sword belonging to the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt has been imbued with his comprehension of a way, which is why the 4 swords possess unique abilities. You stand with the 4 swords, so what unique abilities do you have? The Ziying sword has reached the limits of supreme yang force in the cosmos, which is also known as Grand Yang Force. He can burn countless worlds and even burn the laws of the worlds themselves. The Qing Suo sword has reached the limits of supreme Yin force, which is also known as Grand Yin Force. In a single instance, it can freeze worlds and everything in it and even stop time. If the swords are fused and the Supreme Yang Force and Supreme Yin Force is fused, the fusion will create true chaotic force, which is even more powerful. It can annihilate everything in the world, but unfortunately, Qing Suo and I were heavily injured in the war back then and still haven't recovered, so we're unable to use Supreme Yang Force and Supreme Yin Force. We only possess the abilities of sword spirits, said Ziying. Master, even if Ziying and I can use Supreme Yin Force and Supreme Yang Force, the quality of the two swords right now is not enough to endure their power. They can only withstand it after they've reached supreme quality as immortal artifacts, and coupled with the fact that the two of us were formed from a strand of Yin Qi and Yang Qi that had separated from chaos and gained intelligence, the Supreme Yin Force and Supreme Yang Force are our vital energies, so overusing them will injure us. As for the sword fusion mentioned, it's best that you never attempt it, Master. In order to kill the Grand Prime of the Warring Gods, former Master used the fusion and erupted with devastating power. Although he successfully slew the Warring God Grand Prime in the end, he suffered the backlash of the fusion as well. The backlash was extremely terrifying, and even as one of the 5 great immortal exalts, former Master could not endure it and died. The azulate swords that were of the same quality as the Anatta Tower and the 4 swords of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt were destroyed as a result. Ziying and I suffered unimaginable injuries, only leaving behind spirits. If it were not for the fact that we originated as strands of Yin and Yang Qi, which are impossible to destroy, we would have been vaporized the moment the swords were destroyed back then, Qing Suo said sternly. She still felt lingering fear when she thought back to what had happened back then. Supreme quality immortal artifacts, Jianchen softly murmured and could not help but frown. He had worked tirelessly to collect the materials for forging the azulate swords, yet the swords he had fused in the end were barely mid-quality immortal artifacts. Between mid-quality and supreme quality was a high quality, so it was impossible for him to find such high-quality materials even if he scoured this entire world. The materials required to forge supreme quality immortal artifacts rarely appeared in this world or could never appear at all. If I want to forge supreme quality immortal artifacts, I must go to the Saints' world or the Immortals' world for materials. At the same time, my chaotic flames will definitely have to be extremely pure in order to forge supreme quality immortal artifacts, so forging them right now is still a little too distant for me. However, once I do forge them and Ziying and Qing Suo recover some strength, the Supreme Yang Force and Supreme Yin Force will definitely strengthen me, Jianchen thought. He stared at the world as the light in his eyes flickered. This Anatta Tower was left behind by the Anatta Grand Prime, so it definitely should contain his wealth. I wonder if I can find some materials for forging supreme quality immortal artifacts here. However, I'd better deal with the matter at hand first and obtain this tower as soon as possible. When his thoughts had just ran to their conclusion, the azulate swords suddenly began to revolve around each other before shooting off into the sky. They resonated with a clear thrum, which echoed through the surroundings. A gleam of light flashed through Jianchen's eyes, and he suddenly raised his head. His eyes shone with interest. His gaze was sharp like swords. This time, the 2 swords had flown off by themselves and not because he wanted them to. The 2 swords moved extremely quick, piercing through the clouds in a single moment. Their bright lights illuminated the region, causing the thick clouds in the sky to rapidly disperse and reveal the scorching sun above. The 2 swords shot toward the sun. However, the sun in the sky suddenly released an unbelievably blinding light. The light was so powerful that Jianchen could not help but close his eyes and use his hands to cover them. They throbbed with piercing pain. But the sun in the sky stopped moving. Instead, it continued to let out a blinding light as it rapidly enlarged, falling at a terrifying rate and giving off a tremendous and terrifying pressure. This seemed like the end of the world. The sun was falling and the entire sky was covered by it. It was a grand scene. Beneath it, the azulate swords shot up as long streaks of light, striking the sun with an unstoppable might. Boom! The sun and the swords collided in the sky, immediately erupting with a deafening boom. The entire sky appeared like a woven tapestry with violet and azure strings and the radiance of the sun, causing the entire world to appear multicolored. After the strike, the azulate swords shot back and returned to Jian Chen's side. The huge falling sun in the sky came to a stop as well, immediately stopping in the air. Its radiance dulled as if it was a setting sun and no longer complete. Spirit of the tower, we would still end up finding you no matter where you hid, and just as we expected, you've become weak. Zi Ying's figure appeared, staring at the sun in the sky. He was speaking to it. Qing Sua appeared as well, standing beside Zi Ying. She stared at the sky with her beautiful eyes and said, "Spirit of the tower, so not only are you weak, but you're not even complete. How can you be our opponent in your current state? Why don't you yield to our master instead, and we'll spare your life." Chapter 1481. 9 fragments of the artifact Spirit. Jian Chen's gaze landed on the dim sun as well. He could tell that the sun was probably a transformed artifact spirit. The moment Jian Chen glanced over, the sun immediately began to change, morphing into a red-robed child. The child seemed very young, but his eyes seemed weather-hardened from countless years of life. A shallow slash between his eyes was extremely eye-catching. The child sternly stared at the azulate swords. His eyes were filled with sharp killing intent. He then glanced at Jian Chen. He suddenly broke into laughter and sneered, "This must be the new master of you yin-yang swords. I never thought the famed yin-yang swords of the immortals world would take on such a puny person as their master. What a joke." The sword spirits were unaffected by the child's scornful comments. Zi Ying rebuked, "Spirit of the tower, we may not have been your opponent while injured and in your domain, but you have been sealed up by the nirvanic immortal exalt. Killing you is nothing difficult now. Yielding is the only way you can survive." "You're dreaming if you want me to yield to an ant. Even a Grand Prime cannot make me yield even if they stood before me, let alone him, a person who hasn't even reached godhood and who belongs to the immortals world," the spirit of the tower coldly replied. Killing intent flickered through Jian Chen's eyes. He rose up into the air with the Zi Ying sword and charged toward the child. He swung his sword at him and coldly said, "Then I can only kill you if you don't want to yield." The slash seemed to conjure a huge, violet sword chi that was 100 meters long. It whistled through the air with shocking might. "Just you? Even a mere ant dares to speak to me like this. Even if I'm extremely weak, I can still kill you. Go cultivate for a few 100,000 more years." The red-robed child was extremely confident, displaying deep scorn for Jian Chen. He gently swept a finger across the air and the power of the first floor immediately surged over from all directions, crushing inward with a devastating might. But the 4 swords that Jian Chen had seen earlier shook gently, immediately letting out a hazy glow. They suppressed the power of the Anata Tower. The child could only use a tiny sliver of it in the end. However, even the tiny sliver possessed the power of someone at receival. It shot toward Jian Chen as a thread. Jian Chen stabbed the Zi Ying sword at the thread of energy, and it loudly collapsed, disappearing into the air of the first floor. The power of the thread was slightly weaker than the receival expert from the world of Forsaken Saints that Jian Chen had killed, so not only had it failed to injure Jian Chen, but it even struggled to stagger him. Jian Chen's figure paused slightly before immediately disappearing, only leaving behind an afterimage. He charged toward the red-robed child at an even greater speed. The boy's face changed, and he immediately retreated in a hurry. Along the way, he constantly waved his arms, condensing threads of energy from the Anata Tower's power, which was being suppressed by the 4 swords. The threads all possessed the power of a single attack from a receival expert, and they all shot toward Jian Chen with a wave of the boy's arm. Jian Chen's gaze sharpened as he rapidly approached the boy. Jian Chen cleaved all the threads of energy that were shot his way, producing violent ripples of energy, which would disperse into the surroundings with deafening booms. The boy was unable to stop Jian Chen's advance at all. The child's face immediately became distorted when he saw how he could do nothing to Jian Chen. It became extremely vicious as he furiously roared, "That goddamn nirvanic old bastard! He couldn't destroy the Anata Tower, So he split me into 9 fragments instead, forcing each fragment to protect only one layer of the tower. Not only am I unable to recover my strength, but I have to endure the suppressing sword chi he left in me. How could I have fallen to such a miserable state otherwise, where I can't even kill an ant? The red-robed boy knew he could no longer escape as he watched Jianchen rapidly approach him. Even in his own territory, he was unable to recover due to the seal within him. The longer the battle was drawn out, the more disadvantageous it was to him, so he immediately went crazy. He stopped and charged forward, charging toward Jianchen with the last of his power. He furiously roared, "I have 9 bodies and each one is more powerful than the last. My body on the first floor is the weakest, and the one on the 9th floor is the strongest. You can kill me on the first floor, but I'd like to see how you will kill me on the 9th floor. As long as I live on that floor, you will never be able to obtain the tower." The boy charged toward Jianchen without fearing death. He did not avoid the Ziying sword at all. He pointed his chest at it while it flickered with a violet light. Spurt! The Ziying sword passed through the child's chest, but at the same time, the boy landed a punch on Jianchen. The fist collided violently with Jianchen, erupting with a deep thud. Jianchen's face changed, and he vomited blood. He was immediately blown back while the boy's body gradually dispersed. Jianchen only managed to stabilize himself after traveling several kilometers. His face was pale. Even though the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt had split the spirit of the tower into 9 fragments, which were all sealing him, even just the weakest possessed the strength of someone within the Origin Realm. It was extremely difficult for Jianchen to endure a strike from an Origin Realm expert, so he was left heavily injured. As the child vanished, the space where he had been standing before immediately began to tremble, gradually transforming into a dark hole. Jianchen knew that the hole was likely the entrance to the next floor. However, he did not rush forward. Instead, he sat down where he was. A strand of extremely dense radiant Saint Force origin energy swelled forth, covering his body in a gentle, white light. Meanwhile, his injuries began to heal at an unbelievable rate. In just a few seconds, Jianchen recovered from a wound that others would take a few months, the very least, or a few years to recover from. He was as good as new now. Jianchen stood up only after reaching his peak condition. He confidently walked into the dark hole that led to the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor also possessed a huge world. It was desolate and showed no signs of life. The first thing that Jianchen did was tear through the clouds after arriving on the 2nd floor. He stared at the sun. The sun was truly just a fragment. It was heavily damaged and less than 1/10 of its original size. Jianchen stared at the sun for a while before confirming it was not the artifact spirit in the end. After confirming that, he looked at the clouds beneath and looked around, only leaving after confirming that there were no problems. Jianchen aimlessly flew about the 2nd floor. He passed by barren mountains after barren mountains. The skeletons of a few beasts lay on them. They were all extremely large and seemed to possess strength far greater than the Origin Realm back when they were still alive. The skeletons should have been preserved for long periods of time. Maybe because the tower had been damaged, but they had all eroded away. With just a gentle touch, they would turn into a pile of dust. Chapter 1482. The tower spirit's shock. The world of the 2nd floor was much more complete. Even though the ends of the floor also possessed the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's 4 swords, which were hovering in dark space, the remaining world still possessed a few mountains and rivers. Jianchen had even found a sea. Without exception, the mountains were barren and the rivers were dry. Even the sea had been reduced to a relatively small basin. Jianchen had even come across cities. Each city was countless times larger than any capital city on the Tianyuan continent. The damaged city walls stood thousands of meters high, reaching toward the sky, while the city itself was filled with humanoid skeletons. Some of the skeletons even bore a shred of presence from their former lives. Jianchen immediately leaped in fright when he sensed them, but no matter how powerful their former owners were, the skeletons had been eroded by time, along with everything they had once possessed. It was not that the items here could not withstand the erosion of time, but that the Anata Tower had been damaged. They suffered from its effects and all passed away during the great battle. When Jian Chen arrived in another giant city, the azulate swords immediately perked up. Zi Ying's voice rang out in his head. Found him, master. The spirits hiding in the city ahead. Just as Zi Ying spoke, the ground suddenly began to shake. The damaged city walls immediately collapsed, kicking dust into the air. Swords of yin and yang, you are far too wretched. I will suppress you. An angry roar reverberated from the city ahead. A red-robed boy furiously flew from the city. A vicious glow was present in his eyes. He seemed fierce. The boy had sensed that the sword spirits had found where he was. Even though he was very weak, Jian Chen would not be able to find him within the Aneta Tower if he hid properly. However, he could not hide from the sword spirits. His position had been revealed by the sword spirits on both the first and second floor, so his hatred for the sword spirits was growing deeper. As the boy charged over, the power within the Aneta Tower immediately surged. This time, Jian Chen could clearly sense the boy's strength. He was actually quite stronger than he was on the first floor. However, Jian Chen felt no fear. He slashed out and imbued the attack with his comprehension of the way of the sword. A sliver of power from the ways surged toward the boy's head. Freeze, world! The boy yelled out. As soon as he finished speaking, the time in the world where Jian Chen stood seemed to stop. Even the air seemed to stop moving as well. Everything had frozen at that moment. Jian Chen came to a halt. He had been frozen while swinging his sword, unable to move at all. The azulate swords were unable to move either. The resplendent glow they gave off completely froze in place as well. It was also freezing space, but the red-robed boy's abilities were incomparable to Saint Kings or Saint Emperors. Not only did the frozen space trap Jian Chen, but it even managed to trap the sword chi from the azulate swords. The four swords at the boundaries of the second layer gently trembled and the frozen space around Jian Chen returned to how it had been. As soon as he regained his mobility, he saw a streak of red light descend from the sky, forming a cage around him and the azulate swords. A mysterious power permeated the cage, limiting the strength that Jian Chen could display, immediately making him feel like even just 80% of his full strength was impossible to achieve. The chaotic force within him circulated abnormally slow as well. Swords of yin and yang, I can't kill you, but I can suppress you, the red-robed boy roared out. Mysterious inscriptions hovered in front of his hands. He then sent them toward the Zi Ying sword and Qing Suo sword with lightning-like speed in an attempt to force the inscriptions into the swords. The two swords grew brighter and resisted with their full might, but to Jian Chen's surprise, he had lost control of the two swords. However, he used a finger to condense some sword chi and stabbed at the boy. Piss off! The boy was busy with suppressing the azulate swords, so he did not want to spend too much time dealing with Jian Chen. Faced with Jian Chen's attack, he did not try to avoid it at all. He just raised his right fist and hurled it at Jian Chen. Jian Chen's sword chi was dispersed by the boy's punch. Even though the sword chi was dispersed, the fist did not slow down at all. It landed on Jian Chen's chest, and with a thud, Jian Chen was blown out of the boundary of the cage of light. The boy's entire right hand disappeared as well. The next moment, a new arm grew out of the boy's body. The boy clearly dimmed when the new arm appeared. Jian Chen was immediately free of the restrictions the moment he left the boundary of the red light. He condensed a strand of sword chi with his fingers and attacked the cage of red light from outside. It constantly shook under his attack. The red-robed child used all he had to suppress the azulate swords within the cage of the red light. He said with a vicious face, "Swords of yin and yang, once I suppress you, I'll throw you into the space annihilated by those four swords from the Nirvanic bastard. I'd like to see how you return. Without your help, I won't have to expend any effort to kill that ant. This is my territory after all. I reign supreme within my territory. Tower Spirit, you still can't kill Master with your current strength. This Aneta Tower will be of great help to Master, and he's come with the intention of taking it. The only way for you to survive is to yield to Master," persuaded Zi Ying. She was using everything she had to resist the boy's suppression. "Oh, swords of yin and yang, are you mad? You actually want me to yield to an ant? The boy laughed aloud. His voice was filled with scorn and sarcasm. Tower Spirit, Qing Sua and I were born in the cosmos and transformed from a strand of yin and yang qi. You are also born from the cosmos and transformed from away in the world. We don't wish to see you die here either. Master may still be weak, but he's not as simple as you have imagined him to be. Tower Spirit, you have to know that no matter how powerful you become, even if you reach the peak of Grand Prime or Immortal Exalt, you still won't be able to detect it. Only we spirits who are born from the universe can see it. Use that ability and take a look at our master. I believe you will be able to catch a glimpse of the future, Ziying said sincerely. Oof, an ant will be an ant. So what if he's extraordinary? He'll become a grand exalt of the Immortals world at most, and look at what happened to the greatest expert of the Immortals world, that Nirvanic bastard. Didn't he die in the end as well? The boy sneered. He did not care about Jianchen at all, but he was still tempted to glance at Jianchen. This glance was not just a single observation. He was using his unique abilities as a spirit to catch a glimpse of someone's future. The boy's face drastically changed after that glance. His eyes widened drastically while shock and disbelief filled his face. No, impossible, this is impossible, this is forbidden. The world cannot allow this. This cannot happen. Chapter 1483, Slaying the Artifact Spirit of the Second Floor. The boy loudly cried out while his face paled in a single moment. The gaze he sent toward Jianchen underwent a drastic change as well. He no longer looked at Jianchen like he was an ant but a terrifying existence. Impossible, it's impossible for this to appear. It's impossible for this to happen. The world will not allow this at all. This is fake. This is fake. I refuse to believe it. The boy seemed to lose his mind as he violently trembled. The gaze he sent toward Jianchen was filled with terror, shock, and disbelief. Tower Spirit, the outcome you just saw is fated to happen. You know whether it's real or not. Are you willing to yield to our master now? Ziying asked nonchalantly. Even though she and Ziying had once stood on opposing sides to the Ina Tower, they still wished that Jianchen could subdue the Tower Spirit even if there was only the shred of a possibility. That way, not only could Jianchen avoid many difficult battles, but he would obtain the entire tower as well. After all, the difference of an Anata tower with an artifact spirit and without an artifact spirit was extremely great. Tower Spirit, considering that we're all spirits born from the world, we don't wish to see you die here, which is why we're persuading you to yield to our master. You may be transformed from a strand of the universe's origins, but you are not eternal. Even the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt would need to take extreme measures to kill you when you were in your prime, but you've already been suppressed by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt for many years now. Not to mention the fact that you've been split into 9 fragments, which has prevented you from recovering at all after all these years and causing you to weaken to such a state. You no longer possess the toughness you once had before. Killing you is not difficult, Ziying said in a deep voice. The red-robed boy did not waver at all. He looked at Jianchen in terror sometimes, viciously at other times, and even madness. He roared out, "You're dreaming if you want me to yield. Since I can see the terrifying future of your master, I will destroy him right now and prevent it." The fear in the boy's eyes vanished and was replaced by a vicious madness. He stopped suppressing the sword spirits and charged at Jianchen without the fear of death. Determination appeared in his eyes. He was willing to sacrifice everything. The boy was much stronger than when he had been on the first layer. Even though the seals of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's 4 swords still existed, he could use slightly more power than on the first floor. As the boy charged over, the power of the tower surged once more, rapidly condensing into a miniature tower before the boy. The tower was only 3 inches tall, and at a closer glance, it was actually a miniature of the Anata Tower. As soon as the tower was condensed, it began to exude a mysterious and powerful force. It was filled with a brutal and destructive intent, causing Jianchen's eyes to narrow. The azulate swords were still entangled by the boy's suppression. Without the swords, Jianchen's strength had drastically fallen, so he did not choose to take the attack head-on. With a single movement, he left behind an afterimage, reappearing 100 meters away. The boy's miniature towers struck the space where Jianchen had stood before. When the tower hit the space there, it immediately produced a groan as strands of a destructive power saturated the air there, causing the space there to violently tremble. If it were not for the fact that the space within the Anata Tower was extremely tough, the boy probably would have caused the space in a radius of over 1,000 meters to collapse. "Where do you think you're going? I'll kill you today and completely end you," the boy yelled. He continued toward Jianchen, who was 100 meters away. His mad eyes were fixated on him. They were filled with crazy killing intent. Jianchen was stunned. He stared at the boy and could clearly sense that the boy was different, as if the boy was a whole different person. It seemed like he had completely fallen out with the boy. The boy wanted to kill Jianchen regardless of the price he had to pay. However, this thought disappeared with a flash in Jianchen's head. He stared at the shrunken tower in the boy's hand. He could clearly sense that the power within the tower had weakened after the strike from before. Chaotic force surged within Jianchen. The chaotic Naiden within his dantian spewed out large amounts of chaotic force. It moved through his body and filled every inch of it. He condensed a chaotic sword chi in his right as well. Sword origin. With a thought, strands of powerful sword chi began to condense from the surroundings. The sword chi possessed the power of ways, fusing with the chaotic sword chi in Jianchen's hand. He stabbed toward the boy's tower with lightning-like speed. With a boom, Jianchen's body violently shook before stumbling back. He only stabilized himself after moving several hundred meters away. The sword chi in his hand had dulled. Meanwhile, the boy had only paused in his advance. He continued charging after Jianchen, still filled with a vicious madness. The miniature tower in his hand had become even more illusory. The boy had originally been able to use all the power of the tower as he wished as long as he was in it, but the Anata Tower had been sealed by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. Thus, the power he could use was unprecedentedly low. He could not even replenish it after he used it. This was why he was becoming weaker the longer he fought Jianchen. Jianchen was different. The consumption of his chaotic force was extremely gradual, while the sword chi condensed from his comprehension of the way of the sword only took a slight toll on his soul. The tower spirit was unable to handle a battle that dragged on. After a single moment, the chaotic sword chi began to glowing once again in Jianchen's hand. The way of the sword fused with it as he slashed at the boy again. Boom! Jianchen staggered back again after the attack. His face was now pale, but the miniature tower in the boy's hand had completely disappeared. He was also pale, but the vicious madness in his eyes had not weakened at all. Instead, it had grown thicker. Jianchen swung his hand and shot a strand of sword chi between the boy's eyes before the boy could stabilize himself. Spurt! The sword chi left behind a wound 3 inches wide on the boy's forehead. However, he did not die. His body only faded slightly. At the same time, the azulate swords finally broke free from their restraints. They flew over as long streams of light, passing through the boy's body and returning to Jianchen's hands. The boy's illusory body finally disappeared after receiving the attacks of the swords. His gaze appeared vicious, mad, and regretful. "Master, even though the tower spirit is weak, it's very difficult for you to kill him with just your strength. Only Qing Su-a and I can deal fatal wounds to him." Ziying's voice rang through Jianchen's head. Jianchen gazed at the hole to the 3rd floor, which appeared with the boy's death. He did not show any happiness at all and frowned instead. The body of the artifact spirit has been split into 9 fragments by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. They guard the 9 floors of the tower. The one on the 1st floor is the weakest, and the one on the 9th floor is the strongest. We've only arrived on the 2nd floor and he's already so difficult to deal with. I wonder just how powerful the artifact spirit will be once I reach the 9th floor. He'll probably be very hard to deal with just my strength. Jianchen revealed his worries. He needed to advance to the 9th floor to obtain the Anata Tower, or all of his progress was pointless. Originally, Jianchen planned on looking for some things left behind by the Anata Grand Prime in the Anata Tower, but after going through the first 2 floors, he understood that everything that had been stored on the floors, no matter how valuable, had been destroyed when the tower became damaged. They had been reduced to dust. Probably only the items that the Enata Grand Prime had devoted special effort to store away would still be in perfect condition. Master, using the tower spirit strength from the first and second floors, the tower spirit on the 9th floor will indeed be much stronger than Master. Unless Master uses all that he has, it's impossible for you to be his opponent with your current strength, Ziying said rather sternly. It's just a pity that the tower spirit doesn't want to yield to Master, or it would have been much easier to obtain this tower, but don't despair, Master. Even if you can't attempt the 9th floor right now, even the 9th floor won't be able to stop you soon, said Qing Sua. Jian Chen fell silent. The tunnel to the world of Forsaken Saints on the Tianyuan continent was stabilizing and there was nothing he could do about it. Eventually the tunnel would be tough enough to withstand the passage of returnance experts. He wanted to try all the options available to increase his strength, and it was extremely likely that a great fortune was hidden within the Enata Tower, which was why he did not want to give up on it yet. At the same time, Jian Chen was not completely confident he could survive the next battle against the foreign world, so this would likely be the final adventure of his life. He wanted to try his best to gain control of the Enata Tower. He would not feel regretful even if there was no great fortune like he had imagined. Suddenly, Jian Chen seemed to think of something. His eyes gradually lit up as he said, "Maybe it's not completely impossible. The sword chi that the Nirvanic Immortal exalts left around the Enata Tower still exists even after countless years. This sword chi has probably already gained spirituality now. Maybe I can ask them for help." The sword spirits were stunned. They had never thought that Jian Chen would actually try to seek help from the sword chi. Ziying shook his head. "Master, that's impossible. The sword chi may now possess spirituality, but they also possess the will of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The will he left behind for the sword chi was to suppress and seal. It's basically impossible to get the sword chi to abandon the will of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt and get them to help you." Chapter 1484. Intelligent sword chi, even if it might not work, I still have to try. Jian Chen made up his mind. He did not rush off to the 3rd floor and instead arrived near a boundary of the 2nd floor. A 30,000-meter-long sword chi hung in the shattered space and would remain there for all of eternity. It was the Sword of Mortality, which possessed one of the ways comprehended by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The sword possessed the power to destroy the foundations of immortals and prevent them from becoming an immortal ever again. Back then, your master was unable to destroy the Enata Tower, so he left you, the Sword of Mortality, here to suppress the tower. He also split the artifact spirit into 9 fragments and then sealed them on each floor of the tower. The artifact spirit has become extremely weak after so many years of suppression. Junior managed to slay the artifact spirit on the 1st and 2nd floors, but the artifact spirits will only get stronger the higher I go. With my current strength, it will be very difficult for me to reach the 9th floor, and without killing the artifact spirit on the 9th floor, the spirit will never really die off. I hope you can assist me. Help this junior battle against the artifact spirit of the Enata Tower and completely eliminate him, thus completing one of your master's wishes. At the same time, the Enata Tower of the Saints' World will become an item of our immortals' world." Jian Chen stared at the huge sword in the air and sincerely pleaded with it. The sword hung quietly in the dark space. It did not give off any movements or sound. Although it was only a strand of sword chi, it had gained a certain level of spirituality after so many years. Jian Chen waited for quite a long time. After not receiving a response from the Sword of Mortality, he used his comprehension of the way of the sword in an attempt to resonate with the sword chi. He did not attempt to comprehend the will of a sword god that existed within the sword chi. All he wanted to do was gain its recognition and treat him as one of its own. This was because the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt also comprehended the way of the sword. Jian Chen walked the same path of cultivation as the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. There were probably many sword immortals who comprehended the way of the sword in the immortals' world, so the cultivation path he took probably did not matter much at all, but it filled Jian Chen with some hope. The Sword of Mortality still did not respond. It remained within the darkness, like how it had been before. Jian Chen attempted many other methods, but they all resulted in failure. In the end, he stayed there for 3 days and only left after seeing that nothing he did had any effect. However, Jian Qin did not give up. The sword Qi in the tower had developed intelligence, so he firmly believed that the sword Qi could understand what he was saying. Jian Qin soon arrived before a second illusionary sword on the second floor. It was the sword of reincarnation, which also possessed one of the ways comprehended by the nirvanic sword immortal. It could send immortals into an endless cycle of rebirth, which they could never break free from. Jian Qin repeated what he had said to the first sword and then tried many other methods as well, but the results were the same. He did not receive a response at all. 3 days later, Jian Qin left and arrived before the sword of slaughter. The outcome was the same as the 2 swords from before. Jian Qin also remained there for 3 days before advancing to the 4th sword of the nirvanic immortal exalt, the sword of severance. After another 3 days, Jian Qin left, dejected. He returned to the 1st floor of the tower with some regret and advanced toward the 4 boundaries in a similar fashion. 12 days later, Jian Qin had visited all the swords on the 1st floor, but the outcome was still disappointing. Although the 4 strands of sword Qi possessed intelligence, they paid no attention to Jian Qin at all. They did not respond to him. Was I wrong? These strands of sword Qi may possess spirituality, but they don't seem to be as intelligent as I thought they'd be. They can't understand my intentions, or maybe they do understand my intentions, but they can only remain in place, suppressing the Anatta Tower because of the nirvanic sword exalt's will and can't assist me in fighting the artifact spirit. Jian Qin murmured as despair flooded his face. He could not help but begin to suspect he was hoping for too much. After all, they were only strands of sword Qi left behind by the nirvanic immortal exalt. There's another 108 sword slashes outside the tower. Even though each slash is only a few inches long, I can tell that the sword Qi within each slash is even more powerful than the 30,000-meter-long strands of sword Qi in the Anatta Tower. They might possess greater spirituality. It doesn't matter if I end up failing, but I need to give it a try, Jian Qin thought. Determination flowed through his eyes. He immediately dismissed his thought and exited the Anatta Tower. 108 sword slashes were deeply embedded in the outside walls of the Anatta Tower. Each slash flickered with light and radiated with surging sword Qi. 36 illusory swords were projected from 36 sword slashes. They slowly revolved around the tower. Jian Qin stared at the sword slashes as he stood outside. The glow from the slashes seemed to be playing tricks, as if a figure sat within the light, as if the slashes bore life. I can clearly sense that the sword slashes are all much more powerful than the 4 swords I saw within the tower. At the same time, the spirituality of the sword slashes are far greater than the 4 illusory swords in the tower, Jian Qin mumbled as he stared at the 36 swords that revolved around the tower. He could tell that the 36 swords were composed of the sword of mortality, the sword of reincarnation, the sword of slaughter, and the sword of severance. There were 9 of each. Jian Qin slowly shifted his gaze up and discovered that the 108 slashes became brighter the further up he looked. At the same time, they decreased in number as well. When he saw the 8 slashes on the 7th floor, the light they let out was extremely blinding. They were radiating with an invisible sword Qi. It shook his mind and caused it to leap in fright. There were also 8 slashes on the 8th floor, but the 8 slashes were far more powerful than the ones on the 7th floor. Each slash seemed to contain a miniature sun. Their sword intent were just shocking. Jian Qin dared not to stare at them for too long. However, when Jian Qin glanced at the 9th floor, he suddenly became stunned. He only saw 4 sword slashes on the 9th floor, but the slashes were not as radiant nor powerful as he had imagined. Instead, they were dull and did not give off any sense of spirituality at all. Jian Qin only saw 4 empty sword slashes. Have the 4 strands of sword Qi vanished? Jian Qin was taken aback. He knew that there had definitely been strands of shocking sword Qi within the slashes. The remnant of the marks on the tower proved his point. However, for some reason, the 4 strands of sword Qi that were supposed to be the most powerful had suddenly disappeared. Jian Qin did not think about it too much about. He slowly rose up and utilized his comprehension of sword origin, radiating with his own will in an attempt to communicate with the sword slashes and resonate with them. Jian Chen would have never tried this if the sword slashes did not possess spirituality, but they did. Jian Chen believed the sword slashes could understand him and his intentions. The only difference was whether they wanted to assist him or not. Jian Chen slowly rose up, passing by the first and second floor before continuing to the third and fourth floor. However, the sword slashes did not respond without any exceptions. Jian Chen sighed inside. He had guessed that it would turn out like this, but he did not give up. He gritted his teeth and slowly continued up. Very soon he reached the 7th and 8th floors. The sword slashes there did not respond either. The slashes glowed with a dazzling light and were teeming with spirituality, but they completely ignored him. Jian Chen became even more disappointed. He was unwilling to go to the 9th floor because only empty slashes remained. To him, it would be useless even if he went to that level. However, what Jian Chen failed to notice was that weak strands of his presence were drifting away, headed toward the 4 empty slashes on the 9th floor before being absorbed by them. Jian Chen slowly descended. Just when he had arrived near the 7th floor, the empty slashes on the 9th floor actually radiated with strand of sword qi. The sword qi was not very powerful, nowhere near as great as the slashes on the 8th floor, but they caused Jian Chen to come to a halt. He raised his head and stared at the empty sword slashes in anticipation. The 4 slashes grew brighter and brighter, becoming very dazzling. They glowed like miniature suns, dyeing the entire world a snow-white hue. Although most of the sword qi within the slashes and their spirituality had vanished for some reason, there was still slivers of weak sword qi. The sword qi was insignificant compared to the 8th floor, 7th floor, and the floors beneath. They did not even seem to be able to take part in the suppression of the tower. However, at that moment, the remnant sword qi within the empty slashes rapidly condensed together, creating a blinding light. The light lasted for half a minute. When the white light from the slashes disappeared, the 4 slashes on the 9th floor completely dulled, having been reduced to 4 deep marks. Before them were 4 small swords that glowed with a faint white light. The swords were only the size of a hand, exquisitely crafted, and crystal clear. The 4 sword qi gradually descended before arriving in front of Jian Chen. Jian Chen stared at the 4 small swords and gradually became excited. The swords were small, but Jian Chen could sense a power that caused him to shiver. Any single one of them could erupt with power far greater than his full strength. Chapter 1485. Reciprocity Sword Qi. Shaoling's strength is at returnance, so I've personally witnessed the power at returnance. However, the vague presence from these 4 small swords is far more powerful than Shaoling. Have the power of these swords reached reciprocity? Jian Chen's eyes grew brighter and brighter as he silently sensed the terrifying sword qi within the 4 swords. In the end, his heart even began to beat harder. Fantastic! With these 4 strands of sword qi, I have a high chance of killing the tower spirit, Jian Chen murmured excitedly. He then thought about the threat of the foreign world and began to hesitate. These 4 sword qi exhibit the power at reciprocity. If I use these 4 strands of sword qi to deal with the experts from the world of Forsaken Saints, I'll be able to kill 4 returnance experts at the very least, possibly more, even if they can't harm the Spirit King. Jian Chen hesitated. He had come to the Enna Tower primarily to increase his own strength to deal with the foreign world. However, now that he had obtained these 4 strands of sword qi, he was stuck in a dilemma. He was not sure if he should use the sword qi to deal with the tower spirit and obtain the Enata Tower or just it to deal with the foreign experts. However, Jian Chen made up his mind. He said, I originally only asked these strands of sword qi to kill the tower spirit, so if I use these 4 strands of sword qi to deal with the experts of the world of Forsaken Saints, I would be going back on my word. These 4 strands of sword qi might even disperse, no longer assisting me. Jian Chen no longer wavered. His eyes became determined as he slowly raised his hand, planning on storing the sword qi in his space ring. However, to his surprise, the sword qi immediately disappeared into his hand the moment he touched them. The image of 4 small swords appeared on his right arm. Jian Chun silently sensed his arm. He could clearly feel the existence of the 4 small swords, but the 4 swords no longer seemed tangible to him. Instead, they were 4 illusory strands of sword qi and possessed a faint connection to his conscience. Jian Chen discovered that he could actually use the 4 strands of sword qi as he wished through this connection. The sword qi have already gained spirituality and intelligence. They possess their own lives and are no longer just strands of sword qi. Jian Chen sighed in surprise. He was not sure whether it was because of the nirvanic immortal exalt's supreme strength or him comprehending sword god that allowed his sword qi to become spirits after many years. Jian Chen left the area with the 4 sword qi and entered the Aneta Tower again. Very soon he passed through the 2nd floor and arrived on the 3rd. When he had reached the 3rd floor, before he could gain his bearings, a terrifying killing intent appeared behind him, forcing his muscles to tense up. At the same time, he emitted a bright glow, created from his comprehension of the way of the sword, which wrapped around him. Jian Chen then took a step to the side on instinct. He vanished from where he was with that single step, reappearing 100 meters away as if he had just teleported. Jian Chen had completed all those actions smoothly and in a single moment. His reaction speed was superhuman. Right after Jian Chen had dodged, an ear-piercing whistle appeared where he had been standing. A tiny tower had passed by as a blur, radiating with an overwhelming presence of destruction. The space the tower touched twisted slightly. To no surprise, the red-robed boy hovered behind where Jian Chen had appeared before. The gaze he sent toward Jian Chen was full of anger and seemed be full of fear at times, but that fear would quickly be replaced by wild killing intent. Killing intent flashed through Jian Chen's eyes. With a thought, the Ziying sword shot toward the red-robed boy as a streak of violet light. The Ziying sword crossed several hundred meters and arrived before the boy in a single moment. However, the boy did not pay any attention to the sword this time. He only stared at Jian Chen. Suddenly he vanished, causing the Ziying sword to miss. Jian Chen became alert the same moment the boy vanished. He extended his finger backward all of a sudden and the Qing Suo sword immediately flew from his back, in the direction of where Jian Chen had pointed. With a boom, the boy had appeared behind Jian Chen and used the miniature tower in his hand to strike the Qing Suo sword. The powerful ripple of energy emitted from the collision caused Jian Chen to stagger back. His clone on the 3rd floor is slightly stronger than the 2nd floor, but it's still limited. Killing him here will not be difficult, Jian Chen thought. From the clash before, he had determined the strength of the boy. Freeze world. Suddenly, the boy yelled and the power of the Aneta Tower on the 3rd floor immediately began to surge. It seemed like a law had been created, attempting to shackle time itself. Jian Chen's face changed slightly. He had personally experienced this technique before. It was not as simple as freezing space. Not only could it trap him, but even the azulite swords were not able to avoid it. He would only remain frozen for a short instance, but that was more than enough time to completely change the situation. Sky-severing strike. Before the boy could complete his technique, Jian Chen formed a seal with his hand and used a sword technique as quickly as he could. The sword spirits had passed this sword technique onto him. It belonged to the immortal's world, and even though it was only a basic skill, its power far exceeded any saint-tier battle skill. Jian Chen could erupt with power far greater than his peak when he used it. The Ziying sword immediately lit up as soon as Jian Chen stopped speaking and became 100 meters long in a single moment. It radiated with a mysterious power. The region enveloped by the violet light had become a whole different domain. To no surprise, the boy stood in the domain as well. Jian Chen was completely unaffected in the domain, but to the boy's surprise, he was completely immobilized. Sword domain. God damn it, you want to trap me with a mere sword domain. If I wasn't so weak, just a breath from me is enough to shatter this sword domain. The boy was furious. He was ashamed to be trapped in such a weak domain. As soon as the sword domain formed, the technique used by the boy descended as well, clashing with the sword domain. It immediately caused the area around them to distort, showing signs of shattering. Jian Chen narrowed his eyes. Without any hesitation, he suddenly extended his finger, taking advantage of the moment the boy was trapped. The 100-meter-long sword immediately fell toward the boy. Boom! The strike was extraordinarily powerful. After passing through the red-robed boy, the Zing sword did not slow down at all. It continued toward the ground and immediately erupts with a great boom. The entire ground rumbled and dust was kicked into the air, obscuring the sun. The boy cried out painfully and immediately began to fade. Describing the strike as devastating was no exaggeration. It had even been imbued with Jian Chen's comprehension of the way of the sword. It possessed a sliver of power from laws, the power of ways. Even though the power was extremely puny right now, its strength was evident. The boy had almost dispersed after withstanding such a strike. "I will never let things be easy for you even if I have to destroy this body," the boy roared. He became determined as a flame suddenly rose from his illusory body. Within the flames, the boy's body gradually faded while his presence skyrocketed, becoming more and more powerful. Jian Chen became stern. He knew that the boy was using a secret technique to sacrifice himself to obtain greater power. Just when Jian Chen moved to stop him, the boy's figure completely dissolved in the flames. Only a tiny tower hovered where the boy had been, radiating with terrifying pulses of energy. Swish! The tower turned into an afterimage as it shot toward Jian Chen with an ear-piercing whistle. A destructive presence permeated its surroundings, causing even Jian Chen's expression to change. He knew that this destructive presence was a type of law, the power of a way. Even though the power the child had condensed was not extremely intense, it was still a large threat to Jian Chen. At the same time, the boy had burned his body in exchange for the strike. It was unimaginably powerful. Jian Chen became extremely stern. The tower had already locked onto him, so it was impossible for him to dodge it. In that dangerous moment, Jian Chen used his finger as a sword and pointed at the Qing Suo sword. He cried out, "Spiral Sword Qi!" The Qing Suo sword immediately began to shine, transforming into a streak of azure light and arriving before Jian Chen's chest. The entire sword began to spin like a wheel with the hilt as the center. It spun so fast that it turned into a flurry in just a short moment. It released azure waves, which began to cause the space in front of it to oscillate, as if it had become thick. At the same time, the Zing sword flew toward the tiny tower as a violet streak of light, colliding with it violently and emitting a great boom. The Zing sword was knocked far away, but the tower did not waver at all. It remained locked onto Jian Chen's presence and surged toward him with an unstoppable motion. When it entered the rings of azure waves from the Qing Suo sword, it immediately began to slow down. The power in the tower was actually dissipating at an unbelievable speed. Not only did the waves created by the azure sword slow down the tower, but they rapidly wore the tower down. However, the tower still moved at an unbelievable speed even though it had slowed down, instantly striking the spinning sword. The Qing Suo sword was also knocked far away and stopped spinning. The waves immediately vanished. The tower had encountered two obstacles by now and was only half as powerful as it had been initially. Afterward, with its tip at the front, it passed through Jian Chen's chest. Jian Chen violently trembled as he staggered back. His face instantly paled, and a bowl-sized cavity had appeared in his chest. Chapter 1486. Through to the 8th floor. Jian Chen spat blood from his mouth as his body continued to tremble. The flesh near his wound was dissolving at a visible rate, turning into pools of blood. The tiny tower had deposited a strand of power that came from a law in his wound when it pierced through his body. The power was filled with destruction, constantly wreaking havoc on Jian Chen's body. If it were not for the fact that Jian Chen's chaotic body was extraordinarily tough and had stunted the rate of destruction, probably half of his body would have been eaten away by now. The last portion of power within the tiny tower had dispersed after piercing Jian Chen. The tower itself then began to disperse, immediately releasing the path to the 4th floor. However, Jian Chen was currently enduring intense pain. The sliver of destruction deposited into his body by the last attack was constantly gnawing away at his body, causing the flesh near his wound to gradually vanish, as if millions of ants were eating away at it. Even though his chaotic force was extraordinary, it was not enough to stop the spreading destruction. After all, he did not possess true chaotic force. Just the chaotic force of the fifth layer was not enough to resist the power of laws. Suddenly, Jian Chen roared out while he endured the pain. The roar shook the surroundings and endless white light immediately condensed. He was currently condensing sword chi near his chest, using the way of the sword to resist the power of a law in his wound. The power of a law in his wound immediately came to a standstill with the addition of the power from the way of the sword. These two laws immediately became locked in an intense battle, and in the end, the destructive presence from the artifact spirit ran out of steam and was destroyed by Jian Chen's way of the sword. Jian Chen finally let out a breath of relief after purging the power of a law from his body. The bowl-sized hole in his chest had doubled in size, taking up most of his chest. The organs and flesh in the hole had disappeared. Even though he was very heavily injured, Jian Chen still stood there firmly like a mountain. He was still brimming with life after such injuries because of the power of chaotic force. Only his face was pale. It's been quite some time since I've suffered such a severe wound. The power of laws sure is terrifying. I need to act more careful during future battles against the artifact spirit, Jian Chen murmured to himself before immediately sitting down. He used the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force to heal his wounds. Jian Chen made a full recovery in less than a single minute. The missing flesh in his chest had completely regrown, and he had returned to his peak condition. After changing into a set of fresh clothes, Jian Chen stepped into the fourth floor with the two swords on his back. The fourth floor was an endless expanse of mountains and rivers. Jian Chen discovered many withered heavenly resources and the remnants of extremely valuable medicines. Basically, the entire place was covered with them. It was basically a medicinal garden. But, to his disappointment, the medicines had all been destroyed. Even though the huge expanse had once been covered with invaluable medicinal herbs, none of them remained. Jian Chen also experienced an intense battle against the artifact spirit on the fourth floor. The artifact spirit here was slightly stronger than the previous floor as well. Jian Chen managed to emerge victorious in the end, but he also suffered from even heavier injuries. Jian Chen recovered from his wounds and soon advanced to the fifth floor. Clearly, the Inara Grand Prime raised many valuable and rare beasts on the fifth floor. Huge skeletons loomed everywhere, and there were quite a few that were over 10,000 meters long. Even though they had been dead for quite some time, Jian Chen could still sense a tremendous pressure emanating from the skeletons. The pressure was still suffocating even after all this time. He found it difficult to imagine just how powerful these beasts once were. At the same time, the skeletons had not been eroded away. They remained as tough as stone, but all of them were destroyed during the battle that occurred against the artifact spirit. When Jian Chen finally slew the artifact spirit, he was missing an arm and a portion of his body was destroyed. He emerged victorious only after paying a heavy price. The artifact spirit on the fifth floor possessed a strength no less than late returnants. Coupled with the power of the destructive laws he could control, his battle prowess approached reciprocity. Jian Chen courageously continuing on, making his way through the sixth and seventh floors. The artifact spirits on these two floors possessed strength on par with reciprocity. If it were not for the suppression of the four swords within the tower, these two fragments probably could have erupted with strength at godhood, even after having not recovered any strength for years. Jian Chen was basically left with half a leg when he survived the sixth floor. He was extremely heavily injured and only managed to kill the artifact spirit after several hours of battle. Jian Chen had used everything he had when he attempted the seventh floor. Not only did he equip the primordial god silk, he even used a strand of the sword chi from the sword of mortality on his arm. Only then did he finally slay the artifact spirit. If he had not used that sword chi, he probably would have been done in. But, to his joy, the 4 strands of sword chi could be used more than once. However, he estimated that each strand of sword chi could only display the might of someone at reciprocity 3 times, and after those 3 times were up, their power would weaken and they would only be able to erupt with the power of someone at returnants. The sword chi would weaken with further uses before dispersing completely. Although the primordial god silk was not strong enough to take on origin realm attacks for Jianqin, its toughness was still unprecedented. With the protection of the god silk, Jianqin was able to endure having his body pierced. However, he still had to endure the intense force, which he found rather difficult even though his chaotic body was at the 5th layer. When he moved onto the 8th floor, he took off the primordial god silk without any hesitation. Although it would protect him and prevent his body from being pierced, the strength of the artifact spirit on the 8th floor was probably enough to shake his body to pieces while wearing the silk mail. The artifact spirit on the 8th floor was even more vicious and insane with hidden fear for Jianqin. The fear was so deep that it had reached his spirit. This was already the 8th floor. Along the way, Jianqin had slain 7 other fragments of the artifact spirit. If the artifact spirit on this floor was killed, there was only a single fragment left on the 9th floor. Once the fragment on the 9th floor was destroyed, the artifact spirit would truly disappear. He was unwilling to take the risk of leaving it all up to his fragment on the 9th floor even though he was more powerful there. At this moment, the artifact spirit felt an unprecedented threat. The danger of dying was so powerful that it was countless times greater than what the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt had made him feel. When he faced the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt in the past, he was in his peak condition and being described as immortal was no exaggeration at all, but he was not the Immortal Exalt's opponent. Coupled with the Inata Grand Prime, the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt was unable to kill him, only managing to suppress and seal him away. However, after so much time, not only had he failed to recover at all, but he was still growing weaker and weaker due to the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's suppression and seals. He was coming close to running out of power, so if he was slain now, it would mean true death. After all, he was unable to achieve what the Azulate Sword spirits possessed, which was true immortality. It is already a great honor for you to be able to arrive on the 8th floor. This is where you will be buried today. You will never get the chance to reach the 9th floor. You will die here today, and I will be the one responsible for your death, the red-robed boy yelled at Jianqin. He hovered several hundred meters away from Jianqin. Tower Spirit, are you still too foolish to recognize the error of your ways? You will only die if you do not yield. Ziying appeared and tried to persuade the red-robed boy one last time. However, the response he received was the soaring killing intent from the red-robed boy as well as a strike formed from destructive Allah aimed at Jianqin. With his arms stretched out, he gathered the power of the tower with great difficulty to use a secret technique. This time, the boy used all he had right from the start and did not hold back at all. He wanted to kill Jianqin right here, right now. Jianqin was stern. The boy on the 8th floor was equivalent to experts at mid or late reciprocity. Coupled with the power of the laws he could control, rarely anyone could be his match while at a similar cultivation level. It was impossible for Jianqin to emerge victorious even if he used the Azulate swords. He would not even be able to counterattack. Jianqin's right hand immediately began to flicker with light after he waved it. The sword of reincarnation hidden on his arms suddenly flew out, transforming into a streak of white light and shooting toward the boy at a speed that seemed to be able to pierce the fabric of space. Soon afterward, Jianqin swung his arm 2 more times, sending out sword chi from the sword of slaughter and the sword of severance. He used 3 strands of sword chi to deal with the red-robed boy on the 8th floor. Each strand of sword chi moved at an indescribable speed. As if they were tearing through the limitations of distance, they arrived before the boy in a single moment. The boy's expression drastically changed. His fragment on the 7th floor had experienced the sword chi personally. Although its power was nowhere near the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's strength, it was enough to deal fatal damage to him. At the same time, the sword chi just happened to be able to move at an indescribably fast speed, so fast that the boy could not dodge them. All he could do was watch as they approached him. The first strand of sword chi collided with the power of destruction that the boy had sent out. Only a third of the initial sword chi struck the boy, causing him to cry out miserably while his face distorted in agony. Closely after the first, the second sword chi passed through the boy's body, causing him to become partially transparent. The secret technique he was about to use was disrupted as well. When the third sword chi struck him, his figure immediately dispersed, reduced to a cloud of thin mist. Chapter 1487. The ninth floor. Although the 3 strands of sword chi were only equivalent to attacks at reciprocity, the power of the way of the sword originated from the nirvanic immortal exalt. Although the power had dropped below the level of sword god due to how much time had passed and was no longer as great as it had been before, the strands of sword chi were still more powerful than sword origin, so each strand of sword chi possessed the power to kill ordinary reciprocity experts. Even the artifact spirit on the 8th floor was unable to endure the attack from 3 strands of sword chi, so he began to collapse. However, the red-robed boy did not die. The residual mist in the air began to surge and condense into the boy's figure once again. His figure was so faint that he was almost invisible. Even burning his body would not work this time. I never thought you'd have 4 strands of that nirvanic bastard sword chi, not just 1. However, the 4 strands of sword chi just happened to match up to the 4 swords of that old bastard. Now that you've used all of them, I'd like to see how you will deal with me on the 9th floor. The 9th floor will be where you truly fall. I will be waiting for you there, the boy sneered. Jian-Chen said nothing. With a way of the Ziying sword, he immediately shot out a strand of sword chi and completely dispersed the red-robed boy's figure. Jian-Chen did not hurry to the 9th floor. Instead, he sat down on the 8th floor and recovered to his peak. After all, the most powerful fragment of the artifact spirit was on the 9th floor. It was extremely likely that that fragment had reached godhood. Even though the 4 strands of sword chi still possessed 2 uses at reciprocity, Jian-Chen was not completely confident they could kill the artifact spirit. It was extremely likely to be a vicious battle. If the tower spirit on the 9th floor really does possess strength at godhood, I'll probably be slain the first moment we start fighting even with the azulate swords. With my current strength, I cannot even put up a struggle against a godhood expert. However, the artifact spirit isn't without weaknesses either. His greatest flaw is that he is unable to replenish the energy he consumes, so his power will only decrease during battle. At the same time, whenever he's injured, his strength will fall. Therefore, I'll use the 4 strands of sword chi from the nirvanic immortal exalt to heavily injure him the moment I step onto the 9th floor, causing his strength will fall. Once he becomes injured enough, his strength will fall below godhood. Jian-Chen sat on the ground with his eyes closed as he pondered his options. He simulated his next battle against the artifact spirit of the 9th floor time and time again. Jian-Chen visualized and then analyzed the battle from all aspects. He even added in all the techniques that he knew the artifact spirit could use. The outcome he reached against the final artifact spirit was not necessarily defeat. It would all depend on how the 4 sword chi were used. It's a pity that I've used all these sword chi once already and that they can only be used 2 more times. If they all could be used 3 times, my chances of victory could be as high as 80%. Jian-Chen sighed inside. He felt very helpless. The artifact spirit on the 8th floor was so powerful that it was almost impossible for him to deal with. If he had not used the sword chi from the nirvanic immortal exalt, he would not have been able to reach the 9th floor at all. He would have died on the 8th. But I still have a final trump card. It's just that the price of this technique is just far too precious. Even I cannot endure it. However, it's the only thing I can do if I am at my wit's end. A gleam of light flashed through Jian-Chen's eyes. The fusion of the 2 swords was his final card to protect himself as well as the technique he least wanted to use. This time, Jian-Chen stayed on the 8th floor for half a month. Not only did he make sure he was in top shape, but he even came up with many methods to deal with the final artifact spirit. He made all the preparations he could. Jian-Chen stood up and finally stepped onto the 9th floor. Before Jian-Chen could even make out his surroundings, he immediately moved in a flash, leaving the entry point in a single moment to prevent the possibility of an ambush from the artifact spirit. Everything was tranquil. The dreary world of the 9th floor was terrifyingly silent. There were no signs of life at all. Jian-Chen cautiously hovered in the sky as he vigilantly looked around. He felt rather surprised inside. The artifact spirit was not waiting at the entry to ambush him as he had expected. Is the artifact spirit so confident that he can deal with me that he doesn't need to stoop so low and ambush me? Jianchen thought and immediately became rather stern. At this moment, a smear of golden light appeared near the horizon in the distance. It illuminated a portion of the sky, forming quite a wondrous scene in this dreary world. Jianchen stared at the golden light and hesitated before flying over. The Ziying sword and Qing Suo sword hovered above Jianchen's head. Both of them flickered with light, ready to dish out an attack at a moment's notice. When Jianchen arrived at the source of the golden light, he discovered an extremely vast palace. The palace was letting out a blinding light and gave off a terrifying pressure. It was slightly illusory, making whatever was behind it slightly visible. This palace was only a projection and not the real thing. Jianchen stared at the grand palace. Even though it was just a projection, it felt like it was dominating Jianchen, as if all the laws of the world were beneath it. The heavenly palace of Bixing. Jianchen's eyes landed on the huge plate above the main entrance of the palace. There were 4 words on the plate, and they seemed to possess the variations of the laws of the world. The mysteries of the world were infused into the words. He clearly did not recognize them, but in the moment his eyes landed on the plate, the name somehow appeared in his head. I'll let you die before Master's world. That way, you can die without regret. Ha! Wild laughter rang out and the red-robed boy charged out of the palace, heading toward Jianchen as a blur. The pressure he gave off was so powerful that Jianchen felt like he was shouldering a mountain. Jianchen's movements had become rather slow while the presence of death spread through his head. He was greatly shocked. Currently, the strength of the boy made Jianchen feel like he was facing an apocalypse. Jianchen's eyes lit up, and with a wave of his hand, he used the 4 strands of sword qi from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. However, he seemed to see an odd smile that was barely visible on the boy's face at this moment. Jianchen's eyes suddenly narrowed due to the smile. At this crucial moment, Jianchen seemed to sense something. His hand continued along the same trajectory as before, but he shot out 4 small swords transformed from regular sword qi instead of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's sword qi. He imbued the sword qi with the presence of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's way of the sword so that they seemed just like the sword qi that the Immortal Exalt had left behind. As soon as Jianchen sent out the 4 strands of sword qi, he swung his hand again and shot out 4 more similar strands of sword qi. He sent a total of 8 strands of sword qi contaminated with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's presence toward the boy at the same time. However, he did not stop there. After shooting out the 8 strands of sword qi, Jianchen then began to use his own sword technique. The Ziying sword immediately became 100 meters long and the sword domain emerged, transforming the region enveloped to a whole different domain. It trapped the red-robed boy. The boy came to a halt. He was frozen, having been immobilized by the power of the sword domain. The 8 strands of sword qi with the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's presence arrived with unbelievable speed and passed through the boy almost simultaneously. Soon afterward, the 100-meter-long Ziying sword also cleaved down on the boy, splitting him into 2. The boy rapidly disappeared, but he did not show any signs of pain or regret at all. Instead, he just smiled, oddly. Jianchen stared at the disappearing boy in shock. His face immediately became extremely ugly as he exclaimed with a sunken face, "That's fake. It's not the real thing." Ah, that's right. That wasn't my true body just then, but a clone I condensed from energy. It's just a pity that you realized too late. A familiar voice rang out from nearby as soon as Jianchen finished speaking. Another red-robed boy suddenly appeared, walking over the side of the palace. He had hid himself there, using the pressure of the palace to conceal his own presence and trick the sword spirits. Just as I had expected. You actually still have the sword qi from that old Nirvanic bastard. If it wasn't for the fact that I was cautious and condensed a clone to test you, I would have been heavily injured already. However, now that you've used up all your sword qi, I'd like to see what you'll use to take me on. Killing you will only take a single move. So what about how forbidden you'll become in the future? You'll still die in my hands, the boy sneered. He suddenly pushed his right hand toward Jianchen and an ancient tower immediately condensed over Jianchen. The tower was several dozen meters tall and appeared exactly the same as the Anata Tower. It radiated with a presence that made Jianchen lose his courage to battle. It loudly fell toward Jianchen. Suddenly, an extremely terrifying pressure appeared from the tower, completely immobilizing Jianchen. His feet were pushed into the ground by the pressure while all his bones creaked, as if they were about to break from the load. The tower above was filled with the destructive power of a law. The power had far exceeded anything Jianchen had seen on the floors below. Jianchen became extremely stern. His presence exploded, and with a flash of light through his eyes, the Ziying sword immediately shot toward the tower in the sky. Jianchen formed a seal with his right hand and the Qing Suo sword began to use its spiral sword qi, producing rings of azure waves in an attempt to weaken the tower's power. Chapter 1488, Scheme Boom. The Ziying sword collided with the tower and a rumble could be, but it struggled to stop the tower. The Ziying sword was knocked to the ground, creating a huge hole. It was deeply buried in the ground. The tower did not slow down at all. It continued to fall toward Jianchen with the destructive power of a law. Only when it came in contact with the sword qi from the Qing Suo sword did it slow down slightly. The waves gently wrapped around the tower, disappearing into the surroundings with slivers of the tower's power. The tower was rapidly weakening within the waves. But this process lasted less than a second before the tower passed through the waves. It landed on the Qing Suo sword. The Qing Suo sword thrummed and was sent into the ground just like the Ziying sword. The spiral sword qi used to weaken the tower immediately collapsed. By now, the tower was only a few meters above Jianchen. Jianchen seemed to lose his mind. Having lost the azulate swords, all he could rely on was his own power to stop the tower. He furiously roared out and coated himself with light. He imbued his fists with both chaotic force and the power of the way of the sword before hurling them at the tower. Bang! With a heavy sound, Jianchen struck the tower as hard as he could with his fists. His body immediately jerked as blood spurted from his mouth. His hands, which had come in contact with the tower, were reduced to a bloody mess. The sound of bones breaking was barely audible. Jianchen's hands fell powerlessly to his sides. All his bones in them had been shattered, no longer able to support raising them. On the other hand, the tower was only 3 inches away from his head now. However, after the several obstacles, there was not much power left in the tower either. Jianchen lay down on the floor and used his entire body to withstand the final strike from the tower. He did it to avoid injuries to his head, allowing his soul to emerge unscathed. Boom! The tower viciously struck the ground. A terrifying force caused the entire floor to shake and rumble. Jianchen's entire body was a bloody mess, having been distorted by the previous attack. He lay on the ground powerlessly, and within him, the destructive power of a law had infiltrated his body and was constantly wreaking havoc. Jianchen was heavily injured. All his bones had been shattered. Not an inch of his body was without wounds. Even standing up became impossible. However, he was still brimming with life after suffering such severe injuries. Sensing the power of the laws that were wreaking havoc within him, the 4 strands of sword qi, from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, hidden on his arm, all suddenly released with a weak strands of sword qi the moment Jianchen wanted to condense the power of the way of the sword. The slivers of sword qi within him did not cause him any harm and instead entered his chest through his arm. They quickly spread through his entire body. Wherever they passed by, the destructive powers in Jianchen would disperse. Very soon, all the destructive power in Jianchen's body had been purged with the assistance of the 4 strands of sword qi. In the end, the slivers of sword qi dispersed by themselves due to being completely expended. However, Jianchen's eyes narrowed when the slivers of sword qi dispersed. He could clearly sense that they deposited specks of light, like starlight, within him. As soon as he used his conscience to sense what they were, the comprehension of the way of the sword appeared in Jianchen's head. The way of the sword. Jianchen's eyes grew brighter. They were filled with excitement and joy. Even though he was heavily injured, his heart began to beat uncontrollably. The dispersion of the 4 slivers of sword chi have actually left mysterious specks of light containing the comprehension of the way of the sword in my body. If I absorb them, they'll definitely help me a bunch, thought Jianchen. However, he also understood that now was not the time to comprehend the way of the sword. With a thought, gentle, white light immediately enveloped his body. As he bathed in the light, Jianchen's wounds closed up at a visible rate, which was just astounding. Meanwhile, strands of chaotic force surged around Jianchen's body. He pushed the regenerative properties of the chaotic body to the limit. He was healing as fast as he could using Radiant Saint Force Origin Energy and Chaotic Force. The 10-meter-tall tower dispersed after expending all its power during the strike. Along with the tower, the figure of the red-robed boy vanished as well. You really don't have that old bastard sword chi anymore. The red-robed boy's voice rang out. From behind the illusionary palace, another red-robed boy emerged. The presence he gave off was even more tremendous than the 2 from earlier. The boy was extremely fearful of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's sword chi. In order to waste all the sword chi in Jianchen, he had used his first clone, but he was still worried that Jianchen would conceal some of the sword chi, so he used another clone. He had used energy to condense both clones, and the second clone had consumed a large amount in order to make his second clone appear exactly the same as his original body both in strength and presence. Although the clone was only able to deal a single strike at late reciprocity, the boy believed that the second clone was enough to test if Jianchen still had any sword chi left from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The boy finally confirmed that Jianchen had used up all the sword chi he had with him. He stared at Jianchen, who currently lay on the ground as mincemeat. I had to pay a very great price to condense a clone while under that old bastard suppression. I won't be able to recover from it. If it wasn't for testing whether you still had that old bastard sword chi, I really would have been unwilling to any waste clones on him. However, he no longer has any more sword chi, so it's time to take his life. The boy smiled victoriously and slowly made his way to Jianchen. He immediately began to radiate with an indescribably tremendous sword chi. It was several times more powerful than the presence of his second clone. The figure of a tower had condensed above the boy at the same time. As soon as the tower appeared, the surroundings changed while the wind and clouds churned. The laws of the world seemed rather disturbed while in the presence of the tower. The tower seemed to contain both laws of destruction and creation, and between those 2 laws, there seemed to be the scorching and violent laws of fire. The Anata tower that the boy had just condensed actually possessed the power of 3 laws. However, the red-robed boy was only able to use a sliver of power from the laws of destruction among the 3 laws because the tower was damaged and no longer complete. At that moment, the boy seemed to have witnessed Jianchen's death. He could not help but laugh aloud. So what if you'll become something impossible in the future? You still haven't matured. Today, I'll kill this impossible thing with my own bare hands. With that, the boy extended a finger toward Jianchen and a dark light immediately condensed from the illusionary tower. It shot toward Jianchen as a dark streak of light. In my prime, just a single strike was enough to obliterate a whole section of the universe. My strength has been greatly reduced now, but it's still an honor for you to die to this attack. The boy chuckled. However, just as the black streak of light shot toward Jianchen with the power from the laws of destruction, a terrifying sword chi, enough to cause the boy to shiver, suddenly appeared. On Jianchen's arm, 8 strands of sword chi shot out in a single moment. Each strand of sword chi was extremely powerful and also possessed the power of laws, the laws from the way of the sword. That old bastard sword chi. How can you still have it? Bastard, you still have his sword chi. Were you willing to die instead of using them? The boy's expression drastically changed. Disbelief flooded his face. The strands of sword chi moved extremely quick, as if they could pierce through space. They completely exceeded the speed of the dark light. The first strand of sword chi collided with the dark light. It silently dispersed. The power of the dark light was far greater than any of the sword chi, but after being obstructed, the light paused and slightly slowed down. The 7 other strands of sword chi all shot toward the red-robed boy. Their supreme speed locked the red-robed boy out of all options of dodging or blocking them. In a single moment, all 7 sword chi passed through the boy, causing him to produce a chilling shriek. His face became extremely vicious and fearful. It was fear for the nirvanic immortal exalt. Even though the boy was extremely powerful on the 9th floor, having reached godhood, the 7 strands of sword chi at the level of reciprocity possessed the power of laws from the way of the sword, enough to deal fatal injuries to him. The boy immediately began to fade and shriek after being hit, having almost been dispersed by the sword chi altogether. Even though the boy did not disperse, his presence began to leak from him like a deflating balloon after suffering these fatal wounds. It rapidly weakened, dropping below godhood in the blink of an eye. Slivers of sword chi seemed to have been deposited in his illusionary body, causing the boy's face to distort in pain. He constantly shrieked as his body trembled. The entire process happened in a single moment. The sword chi moved extremely quickly, injuring the boy more. However, the dark streak of light from the tower was moving closer and closer to Jianqin. Chapter 1489. Immortal Emperor's Essence Blood. With a flash of violet light in a crucial moment, the Ziying sword tore free from the ground and stopped in front of the dark light. Ding! The dark light loudly struck the Ziying sword, and it was blown far away with a clear sound. The dark light still had not dispersed as it continued toward Jianqin. With a flash of azure light, the Qing Suo sword emerged from the ground as well. It stopped in front of the light just like the Ziying sword. It was knocked flying with a clear thrum as well. The several obstacles that stopped the dark light helped Jianqin earn some valuable time. Right now, he had mostly recovered due to his Radiant Saint Force origin energy and chaotic force. All his bones had been reconnected. He endured the agonizing pain and immediately leaped up. He left behind a blur and reappeared 100 meters away. Boom! As soon as Jianqin had moved away, the dark light struck where he had lay. The ground violently shook and a terrifying pulse of energy erupted, wreaking havoc in the surroundings as a storm. It blew Jianqin away even though he was 100 meters away. This time, Jianqin was blown several dozen kilometers away by the energy before landing heavily on the ground. Many of his bones had fractured and broken again, forcing him to repeat the healing process from earlier. Jianqin basically climbed up as soon as he hit the ground. Without any hesitation, he charged off in the direction of the artifact spirit as quickly as he could. Along the way, he remained enshrouded by the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force. Coupled with the circulation of his chaotic force inside, his wounds recovered at an extremely swift rate. The artifact spirit still isn't dead. While he's injured, I have to kill him in one fell swoop, just in case something ends up happened. Jianqin gritted his teeth. Ignoring the pain from his body, he flew in the direction of the artifact spirit as quickly as he could. He crossed several dozen kilometers in the blink of an eye. When he returned back to the heavenly palace of Bixing, he had recovered from 40% of his injuries while the artifact spirit had just managed to purge the sword chi within him. He stared at Jianqin with a sunken face. Although his strength had dropped below godhood now, he was still enough to pressure Jianqin. Bastard, this is my last body and you've injured me so heavily. Even killing you won't be enough. The red-robed boy went completely insane. The killing intent in his eyes was thick as it could be. I'll destroy your body before drawing out your soul. I'll have it undergo the most painful torture in the world for all of eternity and make you wish to be stuck in a cycle of rebirths instead. I'll use everything I have for you to taste the world's most agonizing pain, roared the boy. His hatred had reached a point where it could drown out space and make the world shake. The illusory tower appeared near the boy once again, present with the power of 3 different laws. Afterward, the boy opened his arms and did all he could to channel the remaining energy on the 9th floor into the tower, immediately having it erupt with power again. 4 illusory swords, 30,000 meters long, hung in the dark shattered space around the 4 boundaries of the 9th floor. At that moment, the 4 of them gently trembled and flickered with a faint light, immediately erupting with an even more powerful force. They suppressed the power of the tower on the 9th floor. The artifact spirit could only utilize an extremely limited amount of it after great difficulty. Even though the tower's power was suppressed, the tower the boy had conjured still much more powerful. At the same time, he poured a sliver of his own essence into the tower regardless of the consequences. He then sent the tower toward Jianchen. The tower was illusory, but it was not something Jianchen could afford to underestimate. He became stern. Although it was not as powerful as the strike from earlier, it made Jianchen feel like he was facing death. This strike is on the level of reciprocity. Jianchen guessed the power of the tower and knew that it was not something he could handle with his injuries. At the same time, the azulate swords were not with him either, so he was unable to block the strike just by himself. Jianchen showed no fear. With a flash of light, another 8 slivers of sword chi flew from his right arm toward the tower. They were also strands of sword chi left behind by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The ones Jianchen had obtained from the 4 sword chi outside the 9th floor. Each sword chi could display the might of someone at reciprocity 3 times. After those 3 times were up, their power would decrease. The sword chi Jianchen used was the weakened sword chi, now at returnance instead of reciprocity. The 8 strands of sword chi only possessed the power of returnance by themselves, but if combined, they were no weaker than a single reciprocity sword chi. Boom! The 8 slivers of sword chi collided with the tower and produced a rumble. The violent energy forced Jianchen to retreat while the 8 strands of sword chi and the figure of the tower destroyed each other in the air. God damn it, you actually still have that old bastard sword chi. The power might have weakened, but it was still left behind by him when he was still alive, the boy bellowed in utter fury. Jianchen forcefully stabilized himself after moving back a certain distance. He had already recovered from half of his wounds, and seeing the violent storm of energy before him, he charged over with gritted teeth. He passed through the energy as quick as he could and arrived before the boy, sending out 4 strands of sword chi with a wave of his arm. The 4 slivers of sword chi were all shrunken versions of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt swords. Each strand was the size of a hand, but they now possessed the power of returnance, not reciprocity. However, the way of the sword imbued within them was still better than what Jianchen had comprehended so far. The sword chi in Jianchen's arm dulled after sending out the 4 strands. Their energy was almost exhausted. Spurt! 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 The 4 slivers of sword chi passed through the red-robed boy simultaneously, causing his body to tremble. He faded some more once more. At the same time, the boy waved his hand and sent a streak of light out composed from the power of the laws of destruction, which pierced Jianchen's body. The attack caused Jianchen to vomit blood. The power of the laws wildly wreaked havoc near his injury, causing it to rapidly expand. Jianchen clenched his teeth while determination flooded his eyes. He stared fixedly at the boy and covered himself with light from his understanding of the way of the sword and also used sword chi to fend off the power of laws in his wound. He condensed a sword from sword chi in his right hand and swung it at the boy. The boy shook violently as the madness in his eyes grew thicker. His face became extremely warped. He constantly threw his fists at Jianchen. Each punch contained a sliver of power formed from laws, landing one after another and producing deep thuds. Jianchen was sheet white and constantly vomited blood. He used the sword chi he had condensed in his hand to constantly slash at the boy. The boy's illusory figure violently trembled due to each attack and grew dimmer. In the end, the azulate swords flew over from the distance and pierced through the boy with a shocking amount of sword chi. Right now, both Jianchen and the boy were severely injured. They were both extremely weak as well, making it impossible for either one of them to use any techniques. The Ziying sword had already returned to Jianchen's hand. He wielded the weapon and, coupled with his way of the sword, demonstrated power no less than late receival. The boy's figure had almost dispersed from the consecutive attacks, but Jianchen had paid an extremely heavy price as well. Not a single part of his body was complete as he endured the ferocious attacks from the boy. At the same time, the power of laws devastated his body, eating away his flesh. By now, Jianchen had lost his right arm, half of his body, and a third of his head, almost injuring his soul. He was completely covered in blood and in a despicable shape. However, he still did not give up. He used his only remaining arm to continue slashing at the boy with the Ziying sword. The Qing Suo sword did not just lay around either. Under the sword spirit's control, it constantly pierced the boy. The battle between the two of them was extremely intense and had devolved into close combat. The boy was close to dispersing while Jianchen was close to falling apart as well. He was just far too injured. If he did not have the support of his chaotic body, he probably would have died long ago. The boy wildly roared. Hatred filled his eyes as he bellowed, "I've never thought of this move in the past because it is my only chance at breaking free. However, I've run out of choices now." The boy suddenly raised a finger at the sky and a droplet of golden blood gradually materialized. It immediately radiated with an unbelievably powerful ripple of energy. Jian Chen's expression drastically changed when he saw the blood. Just the energy radiating from the blood made him feel like the world was ending, as if the droplet of blood possessed the power to destroy the world. Is this the Anatta Grand Prime's essence blood? Jian Chen became ashen. He felt despair due to the blood. Ignoring that fact that he was injured, even if he was in an optimal condition, there was no way he could survive an encounter with the blood. The essence blood of an immortal emperor. The sword spirit cried out. That's not a Grand Prime's essence blood? Though, it's still not something I can endure even if it's not from a Grand Prime. Jian Chen stopped attacking the artifact spirit and stared at the blood in the sky. Even fleeing was wishful thinking with the blood in play. This is from Master's traitor of a disciple, Taji. Back when Master had been heavily injured by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt and fled, she faced an ambush from that traitor. She killed him in the end and a droplet of Taji's essence blood was left here, having been kept here since. I originally wanted to use this blood to break through the Nirvanic Old Bastard sword formation after his suppression ran out of energy, but I never thought that I'd have to use Taji's essence blood on an ant like you. As the boy said that, he became calm. It seemed as though death was returning him to where he had come from. Boom. At the same time, the droplet of blood loudly exploded. A devastating power swept through the world, devouring space and crushing the ground. The explosion was indescribably powerful. It filled every corner of the world in a single moment, making it impossible to dodge as long as Jian Chen was on the 9th floor. Chapter 1490. Refining the Anatta Tower. However, when the destructive power was about to reach Jian Chen, he suddenly removed a damaged piece of armor from his space ring and equipped it. Taji's armor! The red-robed boy immediately cried out when he spotted the armor. His face was filled with disbelief, and soon afterward, he and Jian Chen were drowned by the destructive power. After quite some time, the destructive power from the immortal emperor's essence blood vanished and the entire floor returned to peace once again. The space on the 9th floor of the Anatta Tower still existed. The eruption of the blood was like a tiny wave in the vast ocean, unable to damage the tower at all. The sky possessed the same color while the projection of the heavenly palace of Bishing continued to radiate a blinding, golden light. Probably only the cracked ground recorded the brutal scene from earlier. Jian Chen and the red-robed boy had vanished from the world as well. Neither one of their presences lingered on the 9th floor. Only a damaged piece of armor silently lay on the ground. It was covered with dirt while the person who had been wearing it was nowhere to be seen. At this moment, light suddenly began to flicker from within the dirty, damaged piece of armor. The next moment, a ball of light flew out and hovered in the air. Only now was the figure of a person visible. He was only as tall as a finger but glowed with a white light. It was the origin energy of radiant saint force. A golden speck of light flickered within the finger-sized person, and at a closer glance, it was actually a tiny, golden tower. This was naturally Jian Chen's soul. After the drop of immortal emperor's blood had erupted, he was unable to completely protect himself even with the help of the damaged armor. His body was destroyed, but in a crucial moment, he hid his soul in the armor, which was why he was able to escape disaster. Jian Chen's soul hovered in the air and looked around. He then sat down where he was. In a few seconds, a thrum seeming to ring out. The Ziying sword and Qing Suo sword erupted from the dirt and emerged from the ground. They arrived beside Jian Chen's soul. They thrummed loudly, guarding him. Soon, a bloody thing flew out of the soul. It hovered below Jian Chen's soul. To no surprise, it was a piece of Jian Chen's flesh. The soil near Jian Chen began to surge after the first piece of flesh appeared. More bloody pieces burst forth before gathering below Jian Chen's soul. As more and more pieces of flesh gathered from the surroundings, a body completely formed from the remains of various sizes gradually gathered. It was covered with blood, but powerful energy pulsed in each droplet of blood. Jian Chen looked down and saw the body formed from mincemeat. He sighed as he shook his head. He had already devoted everything he had to gathering his own flesh and blood, but a section of it had been destroyed by the power of laws and was completely gone, making it impossible to gather. Jian Chen gathered all the pieces of his body he could sense right now, but there were only enough to reassemble a major portion of his body. He still needed his own power to regenerate the other parts. Fortunately, the vitality of the chaotic body was extremely great. Coupled with his abilities as a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master, making a full recovery was nothing difficult. With a thought, Class 9 Radiant Saint Force Origin energy immediately flew out of his soul. It turned into an extremely dense, white light, which enveloped his ruined body. Meanwhile, his chaotic Niden spewed out strands of chaotic force. The chaotic force was circulated everywhere, not only forcing his flesh to quickly regrow, but it also sped up the regeneration process. Under the dual effects of chaotic force and Class 9 Radiant Saint Force Origin energy, Jian Chen's missing pieces slowly began to regrow. All the cracks and wounds on the body he had pieced together rapidly disappeared as well. Even all his blood flowed back into his body, returning to his flesh. At the same time, streams of chaotic blood, still wet and hidden beneath the soil, all burst forth and flew out of the ground. They all returned to Jian Chen's body through his mouth. The chaotic blood was significant to Jian Chen. Although it was possible for him to replenish the missing blood with his chaotic body, it would exhaust a large amount of chaotic blood. Jian Chen would not have needed to care if he had only lost a small portion of his blood, but basically all his blood had been scattered across the land. He needed to get it all back. Fortunately, he cultivated the chaotic body, so every piece of flesh and drop of blood was connected to his consciousness. Finding the droplets was not particularly difficult. Jian Chen had never been so injured before. He had been reduced to a soul. If his soul had not hidden in the damaged armor, he probably would have died. He had truly been embroiled in a battle of life and death against the artifact spirit. It had been a very long time since Jian Chen had come so close to death. He used more time than he usually would spend recovering in order to rejuvenate his missing parts. He finally made a full recovery after 2 whole days and had used 3 whole strands of Class 9 Radiant Saint Force Origin energy. Jian Chen removed his space ring from the artifact space and slowly placed it on his finger. He then took out a new set of clothes from his space ring and changed into them. He silently sensed the body that he had just recovered and realized that the comprehensions of the way of the sword had not been destroyed, allowing him to let out a breath of relief. At the same time, he discovered that the 4 strands of sword chi were still hidden within his right arm, but since they had been overused, it was extremely difficult for them to dish out strong attacks. Even though they could still force out attacks at receival, they were nowhere near as powerful as a strike from Jian Chen with the Ziying sword. This artifact spirit should have dispersed due to the explosion of the blood as well. After all, he had already been weakened after the battle with me. He wouldn't have had the power to flee when he was so close to me, Jian Chen thought. Even though the battle against the artifact spirit was extremely brutal, he was a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master, so as long as his soul remained, he could recover his body very quickly, unlike regular experts who needed a very long period of time and high-quality medicine. Jian Chen possessed a huge advantage with this aspect. He did not have to worry about being injured. He could even recover his wounds during battle. Jian Chen picked the damaged piece of divine armor that had saved his life off the ground. He gently brushed off the dust on it. He could not help but think back to what the artifact spirit had said when he had pulled out the essence blood and his shocked expression when he saw the armor in his final moments after making the blood explode. The master of this armor is called Taji. I never thought that he'd actually be the disciple of the Inata Grand Prime. Looks like the remains scattered throughout the Sea of Despair were left behind by him, Jianchen thought. He pondered, looks like the Inata Grand Prime engaged in a great battle here with his disciple and probably died during that battle, which is why the Inata Tower ended up here. If the Inata Grand Prime didn't fall, he definitely would have recovered some strength after so much time and would have found it difficult to remove the seal from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. After a moment of silent thought, Jianchen focused his attention. His eyes landed on the projection of the heavenly palace of Bishing nearby. He seemed to see a pure white stone tablet within it. The stone tablet was physical and not a projection. It seemed like it had always existed on the 9th floor and had probably been covered up by the projection of the palace. The stone tablet seemed to belong within the palace. Jianchen walked toward the palace. There were a total of 999 steps outside the palace. They were illusory as well. He could clearly see the ground beneath them. Jianchen hesitated as he stood before the steps. He placed his foot on one to test it out, but to his surprise, even though the steps were illusory, they seemed solid when he stood on them. Jianchen made his way up the steps step by step. He was heading toward the palace. He entered the structure and made his way to the pure white tablet. The stone tablet was white, like jade, and as smooth as a mirror. It was 300 meters tall. When Jianchen stood before it, he felt like an ant standing before an elephant. Master, this should be the control center for the Inata Tower. Let out your soul and use your consciousness to sense it, Ziying's voice rang out. The two swords were revolving around Jianchen, watching over him. Jianchen closed his eyes and let out his soul. He gradually approached the tablet with his consciousness, and when he successfully entered the tablet immediately spat out a piece of information. Jianchen opened his eyes and excitedly stared at the tablet. The tablet just happened to be something crucial for controlling the Inata Tower. He had obtained the refinement method from it. There are 9 layers of the Inata Tower to refine. Refining the first layer will grant you the most basic controls of the tower. The more layers you refine, the more control you will have over the power. At the same time, the power you can use will grow. You can only use all of the tower's power after you refine all 9 layers. Chapter 1491. The Inata Grand Prime, Senior Tianjian has spent 10 years and is still not done refining the Divine Hall from Mercenary City with his strength as a Saint Emperor. The Inata Tower is clearly much greater than that Divine Hall, so I wonder how much time I'll need to refine the first layer of the Inata Tower with my current strength, Jianchen wondered inside before hesitating. The world of Forsaken Saints would invade again in 2 or 3 years. He did not know if he could refine the first layer of the Inata Tower within that time frame. Don't worry, Master. The Inata Tower may be a supreme quality god artifact, but there are 9 steps to refining it. It is indeed impossible for Master to refine the whole tower with your current strength, but you shouldn't take long to refine the first layer with our help, said Ziying. The Ziying sword arrived above Jianchen's head and projected a handsome young man in violet robes. Master will help you out. The Qing Sua sword also arrived above Jianchen's head, projecting a beauty in an azure dress. Jianchen clenched his teeth and said, "If that's the case, let's try to take this tower with us before the foreign world invades again." Jianchen immediately sat down. With assistance from the sword spirits, he began to devote himself to refining the stone tablet. As Jianchen refined the 300-meter-tall tablet before him, it immediately experienced some changes. From the very bottom, the pure white tablet gradually darkened and the dark colors spread up at an extremely gradual rate. The dark portion was the part that Jianchen had successfully refined. When the entire tablet turned black, he would become the second master of the Inata Tower. However, the refinement process became more difficult the further he advanced. When the darkness had reached a height of 3 meters, it visibly slowed down. Unknowingly, Jianchen had already spent a year refining the tablet. During that year, he had refined 90% of the first layer. However, the final part was far more difficult than he had imagined. Jian Chen poured everything he had into it, but he was still progressing slowly. However, Jian Chen did not give up. He desperately refined it, and finally, after another half a year, he successfully refined the first layer. A ninth of the giant tablet was now dark. The darkness represented that Jian Chen had successfully refined the first layer of the Aneta Tower. He could not utilize the basic controls of the structure. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes. His forehead was currently covered with sweat. He was exhausted, but there was an uncontainable excitement in his eyes. The current him could clearly feel a mental connection with the Aneta Tower. He could vaguely sense everything in the tower on all 9 floors. However, he could only sense the second to the 9th second floor in haze. As for the first floor, he could sense it extremely clearly. He could even vaguely gain an idea as to what was going on in the dark regions that had been annihilated by the nirvanic immortal exalt. The annihilated regions seemed as vast as the night sky to Jian Chen. They were unimaginably tremendous. Even the Tianyuan continent did not seem to be 1/100th of the dark regions. The Aneta Grand Prime's treasury really exists on the 9th floor, Jian Chen murmured to himself. His eyes shone. He appeared 100 meters away in the next moment, like he had teleported. He gazed at some empty space before him. The treasury's been hidden in a spatial crack on the 9th floor by the Aneta Grand Prime. Even the artifact spirit can't open it. Only the master of the tower can. It's just a pity that I'm too weak right now, so I still can't open it yet. Jian Chen gently exhaled in disappointment. In a flash, he returned to the heavenly palace of Bishing. I'm actually unable to sense the existence of this palace at all. It must be a projection left behind by the Aneta Grand Prime through an ability in the past. Jian Chen stared at the palace for a while before entering it with long strides. A while later, Jian Chen arrived in one of the halls within the palace. He stood at the entrance and stared ahead. There was a structure made from white jade at the end of the hall. It was only the size of a millstone and seemed like a cushion for meditation. Jian Chen's gaze stopped on the stone structure that was only 3 inches tall for a while. He then looked behind it. A statue stood there. The statue depicted a woman in white clothes. Her figure was slender, her beauty indescribable. She stood there with her head slightly raised, as if she was staring at the void. She did not give off a shocking presence but seemed to have combined and resonated with the world, a transformation of nature itself, having become a law. Who's that? Is that the Aneta Grand Prime? Jian Chen stood at the entrance and stared at the beauty in a daze. He found it very hard to believe the reality that the Aneta Grand Prime, one of the 3 strongest experts in the Saints world, was female. Ziying and Qing Suo appeared. They also stared at the woman's statue in a daze, and only after quite some time did Ziying say, "Former master once clashed with the Aneta Grand Prime several times, but he was surrounded by the ways of the world, causing him to become enshrouded. There's basically no one in our immortal's world who's seen his true appearance." At the same time, his voice was always fused with the ways of the world, having changed to contain all the sounds of the world, so it was impossible to tell his gender. In reality, there's many Grand Primes in the Saints world who've never seen his true appearance either. The heavenly balance of Bishing is the Aneta Grand Prime's residence. There's no doubt about that. Yet, there's actually a statue like this in his residence, so is this really the Aneta Grand Prime's true appearance? Or is this woman the most important person to the Aneta Grand Prime? Qing Suo gently furrowed her brows and stared at the statue out of curiosity. Sigh. At this moment, a vague sigh reverberated through the entire illusory palace. It was a female's voice and sounded extremely gentle and pleasant. It was enough to take people aback, but it also seemed to be weathered, having gone through and experienced many things in the past. Jian Chen immediately became shocked when he heard the voice. He looked around but failed to discover anyone at all. He did not succeed at discovering the origins of the voice either. The voice seemed to echo through the entire palace, possibly the entire floor of the tower. Ziying and Qing Suo narrowed their eyes. They had also heard the sigh and looked around, but they failed to discover anything either. This isn't the voice of the tower spirit, nor is it the voice that we're familiar with from the Enata Grand Prime. It's not the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt's voice either, Ziying said with a heavy voice. May I ask who you are? Jianchen asked. He looked around cautiously. He could vaguely sense everything on the 9th floor, but the palace exceeded his senses. His soul was suppressed in the palace as well, so it was completely useless. I've waited here for over 3 million years for someone to finally come. You are the first after all that time. The vague voice rang out once again. It echoed through the entire hall, making it difficult to discover its origins. However, a hazy, white figure gradually emerged from the statue of the woman near the end of the palace. The figure was very hazy at the start, only a rough silhouette. However, it gradually cleared up and her facial features became visible. She looked just like the statue, not only possessing the same charm but the same bearing as well. Jianchen was shocked inside when he saw the illusory figure. He carefully glanced at the azulate swords and immediately felt rather unsettled. He asked with a heavy voice, "Are you the Enata Grand Prime?" "I am indeed Enata," the figure said with a gentle voice. She stared off into the distance as complicated emotions and memories clouded her eyes. Jianchen's heart sank and his face became extremely ugly. Never would he have thought that the Enata Grand Prime would appear here. Even though the illusionary figure he was seeing right now was probably only a clone of her, it was still terrible news to him. He refused to believe that the Enata Grand Prime did not recognize the azulate swords. Since they were with him, it also meant that he had exposed his connection with the Immortals world. He might have even gotten the Enata Grand Prime to believe that he was a part of that world. The Immortals world and the Saints world stood on opposing sides. The Enata Grand Prime had fought the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt in the past. This was a horrible situation for him. Jianchen could even imagine the hellish moment he headed to the Saints world after his connection to the Immortals world spread through the Saints world. Jianchen's face sank. The light in his eyes flickered uneasily. At that moment, he was tempted to disperse the Enata Grand Prime's figure, but he was uncertain about the strength of the clone, so he did not act recklessly for the time being. The Enata Grand Prime did not seem to notice the changes in Jianchen's expression. Her gaze remained fixated on the distant sky. She slowly said, "Back then, I fought the greatest expert of the Immortals world, the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. I was not his opponent, so I fled with heavy injuries. When I made my way back to the Saints world, my disciple Taji suddenly ambushed me. Caught off guard, he succeeded, so I became even more injured. It was also at that moment when I suddenly realized that my disciple had been secretly working with the Grand Prime Yenzun. He wanted to kill me while I was heavily injured and take my extreme comprehensions of the laws of fire. I engaged in a battle of life and death against the Grand Prime Yenzun and my traitor of a disciple. I managed to kill my wretched disciple, but I was just too heavily injured from the battle against the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, and the Enata Tower had been severely damaged as well. It had also been suppressed by the sword formations of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, so I was unable to use its power. As a result, I failed to kill Yenzun, only managing to destroy his body. I watched his soul escape." Chapter 1492. A Grand Prime's Legacy. Jianchen sucked in a deep breath. At that moment, his opinion of the Enata Grand Prime underwent an overwhelming change. The woman before him had fought the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt first. Heavily injured and locked out of the Enata Tower, she faced the immortal Emperor Taji's ambush, causing her to become even more injured. Under those situations, she actually still had the power to stand victorious against another Grand Prime of the Saints world. Just how shocking was her strength? My injuries were just far too heavy after that battle. My soul was fading and I was going to die in a crack of space. In my final moments, I sent a fragment of my soul into the Enata Tower to leave behind a legacy so that my legacy would never end. Meanwhile, you are the first person who has come after 3 million years of waiting. Since you have made it here, it means that your fate is tied to me. The legacy belongs to you. It is no longer important whether you are a part of the Immortals world or not. The Enata Grand Prime's Legacy. Jianchen was stunned. He was filled with disbelief. After his ties with the Immortals world had been revealed, not only did the Anata Grand Prime refuse to delve into that matter, but she was even giving her legacy to him. It had basically fallen into his lap. The Anata Grand Prime's currently in a very horrible condition. This fragment of her soul has existed here for over 3 million years. It's about to disperse, which is why she chose me as her successor. Jianchen came to an understanding. He would never believe that the Anata Grand Prime would be willing to give her legacy to a person of the Immortals world otherwise. She had done this probably because she had her own reasons and problems. The Anata Tower possesses the suppression from the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt. The fragment of my soul has been weakening every day and has basically reached the end of the road. It's about to disperse into the surroundings, so I don't have much time left. I will formally bestow you my legacy. My only requirement is that you have to go to the Saints' world to kill the Grand Prime Yenzun once you are powerful enough. Are you willing? The Anata Grand Prime was staring at Jianchen with extremely bright eyes. She placed particular focus on the final sentence she spoke. Jianchen clasped his hands at the Anata Grand Prime. With a stern face, he swore, "Don't worry, Senior. If I obtain your legacy, I will definitely kill the Grand Prime Yenzun and take revenge for you once I am powerful enough." The Anata Grand Prime nodded in satisfaction after Jianchen swore an oath. Her shining eyes gradually calmed down, and she mentioned, "There are 2 parts to my legacy. The first part is the Fortune Jade Seat. It possesses my cultivation technique as well as much of my understandings toward cultivation. Not everyone can practice the cultivation technique. Only those who are fated to will be able to practice it. The second part is my extreme comprehensions of laws. I have comprehended the laws of fire, creation, and destruction to their extremes. This pearl contains my comprehensions of the laws of destruction, and it now belongs to you with the legacy. Once you fuse it with your soul, you will be able to comprehend my laws of destruction. Comprehending laws are crucial for reaching godhood. Once you have reached the peak of reciprocity, you can only reach godhood by comprehending laws. Otherwise, you will never be able to advance any further with your cultivation and will be stuck in the origin realm forever. Comprehending 1% of the laws corresponds to deity, 10% to God, 20% to overgod, 30% to God King, 45% to infinite prime, and 60% to chaotic prime. If you comprehend 80% of a single law, you will become a Grand Prime, and if you can reach the limits, 100%, you will become a peak Grand Prime. Even across the entire Saints world, there are only a few peak Grand Primes. I have left you the complete comprehension of my laws of destruction. How much you can comprehend will depend on your own fortune. With that, a black, thumb-sized pearl slowly drifted out, stopping in front of Jianchen in the end. Immediately, the pearl began to radiate with the power of the laws of destruction. Jianchen struggled to contain his excitement as he stared at the black pearl. He slowly extended his hand toward it. The Anata Grand Prime was no longer fixated on the distant sky. Instead, she stared at Jianchen. A sliver of anticipation appeared in her eyes as well as excitement that was deeply hidden. However, it vanished in just a moment, having been hidden away. Finally, Jianchen gently grasped the pearl that contained the power of the laws of destruction. He clearly sensed the familiar power within it, and an odd light immediately flickered through his eyes. When Jianchen grabbed the pearl, excitement appeared in the depths of the Anata Grand Prime's eyes as well as some hidden viciousness. However, these emotions disappeared in just a single moment and her gaze returned to being as profound as ever. Jianchen's grasp around the black pearl tightened. He did not immediately fuse the pearl into his soul. Instead, he took out a wooden box out of his space ring. Under the Anata Grand Prime's confused gaze, he slowly placed the pearl inside before throwing the box into his space ring. The Anata Grand Prime's eyes narrowed by an indiscernible amount. She blurted out, "You need to fuse the pearl into your soul so that you can comprehend my laws of destruction. Why don't you do that? Are you uninterested in my extreme comprehension of the laws of destruction?" Reverence filled Jianchen's eyes. He clasped his hands at the Grand Prime. "I am afraid you have misunderstood me, Senior. It's not that I don't want to comprehend Senior's laws of destruction, but I believe that comprehending the laws right now will be inconvenient. I plan on finding a quiet place to comprehend them first. What inconvenience? In this Anatta Tower, nobody can disturb you. If you go outside, it'll be even easier for people to disturb you. At the same time, comprehending laws is extremely important. If you end up disturbed during the process, forcefully wrenched from a state of comprehension, you will suffer severe injuries. They could be so bad that you might suffer a backlash from the laws and your soul might disperse, the Anatta Grand Prime said sternly. I thank Senior for warning me. I am filled with gratitude. It's just that I've stayed for far too long in the Anatta Tower already. I still have important matters to attend to outside, so I cannot stay much longer. I fear that comprehending laws will only cause further delays and end up ruining what I have to do, Jianchen calmly replied, revealing no arrogance nor humility. He stared at the Anatta Grand Prime in interest. Currently, her body had become extremely faint, as if she was about to disperse. The Anatta Grand Prime remained silent for quite a while before slowly replying, I will no longer urge you if that's the case. However, please do remember to fuse the pearl with your soul as soon as possible and comprehend my laws so that you can take revenge. With that, the illusory figure gradually dispersed under Jianchen's gaze. Jianchen slowly arrived before the statue in vigilance after the Anatta Grand Prime had completely vanished. He studied the sculpture for around half a day, silently frowning. Ziying, Qingsu, do you think that the Anatta Grand Prime has really faded away, or has she just continued hiding? Jianchen asked the sword spirits. Only the sword spirits and him were able to hear his thought. The sword spirits did not reply immediately. Qingsua's lark-like voice rang through Jianchen's head after quite a while. Master, she doesn't seem to be the Anatta Grand Prime we remember. Master, I also doubt whether she's the real Anatta Grand Prime or not. We may not have seen the Grand Prime's appearance before, but our instincts can't be wrong, Ziying stated his thoughts as well. The entire conversation was held in Jianchen's head, so no sound was emitted at all. Jianchen calmly replied, You really have seen through her. I must agree that I don't think that this Anatta Grand Prime is the real Anatta Grand Prime either. When she gave me the pearl with the laws of destruction, I saw a familiar glint of light in her eyes. Even though she hid it very well, I still managed to catch it. It was extremely similar to the light in the artifact spirit's eyes. Has she been bewitched by the spirit of the tower? It's a pity that we can't sense the presence of that spirit in this heavenly palace of Bishing. Otherwise, we would have been able to recognize him with a single glance no matter what he turned into, answered Ziying. It doesn't matter whether she's the artifact spirit or the Anatta Grand Prime's disciple, Taji. Anyway, I can't use her comprehension of the laws of destruction. There are definitely problems with this object, Jianchen coldly replied. A sliver of a stern light flashed through his eyes. He would not pay any attention to the story that the fake Anatta Grand Prime had told him either. Jianchen glanced at the fortune jade seat before the sculpture. The seat was only the size of a millstone and 3 inches tall. It was pure white all over and let out a gentle white glow. Jianchen could sense a calming presence from the seat, especially when he approached it. Just breathing near it had cleared up his mind and focused his attention, as if his soul had become even more consolidated at that moment. Master, Fortune Jade is a unique treasure of the world. It's extremely rare, and if you cultivate with just a piece of it, not only will you cultivate much faster but will also help you comprehend laws. It has the same effects as the comprehension tea, but its effects are slightly superior. I never thought that the Anatta Grand Prime owned such a great piece of it. This jade is so rare that even former master, one of the 5 great immortal exalts of the saints' world, did not possess a piece. Only the nirvanic immortal exalt of the 5 possessed a piece, but it was not even a third of the piece of jade before you, Qingsu said enviously, gently sighing. Her face was filled with regret because the fortune jade seat before her was illusory. It was just a projection, like the palace, and not the actual thing. Jianchen's interest was immediately piqued. However, he could only helplessly sigh. The Anatta Grand Prime sure is great. This fortune jade seat is only a mere projection. yet it possesses similar effects to the actual thing. Sigh, if I only had the actual thing. With it, I would be able to comprehend the way of the sword far more easily. Jianchen paused for a while before continuing his questions. The fake Anata Grand Prime said that the Fortune Jade seat possessed the cultivation method of the Anata Grand Prime as well as most of his understanding toward cultivation. Do you think that's true? Jianchen became much more vigilant inside after noticing that the Anata Grand Prime was a fake. He did not believe anything that she said. Even to the Anata Grand Prime, such a large piece of Fortune Jade is extremely precious. It would have definitely received a lot of her attention and might even possess a seal from the Anata Grand Prime. This piece of jade was projected along with the heavenly palace of Bishing, so the actual thing should still be in the saint's world. Only the Anata Grand Prime is able to project the heavenly palace of Bishing and the Fortune Jade seat so realistically in the Anata Tower that this may be in the Anata Tower, but this palace is the handiwork of the Anata Grand Prime. The artifact spirit doesn't have the power to meddle with it. Chapter 1493. The Fortune Jade Seat. Master, I think the story from the fake Anata Grand Prime is true. It was extremely likely that the Anata Grand Prime was ambushed by Ta Ji and Yen Zun after being heavily injured by the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, which was why he died in the end. Before he died, he used his abilities to project the heavenly palace of Bishing and his Fortune Jade seat here and also recorded his cultivation method in the seat, hence leaving behind his legacy. This is because rarely anyone can enter the heavenly palace of Bishing in the saint's world. If he didn't do that, it is extremely likely that his lineage would have ended then. Jianchen sank into his thoughts, and only after quite some time did he conclude, if that's the case, the legacy of the Anata Grand Prime should be true, and some of what the fake Anata Grand Prime said was probably what the Anata Grand Prime left behind. Obtaining the legacy to kill the Grand Prime Yenzun is true, but the only thing we cannot believe is the comprehension of the laws of destruction. Correct. The comprehensions are extremely likely a scheme devised by the artifact spirit. His intentions are likely to possess Master. Trying to possess people as an artifact spirit is forbidden. You'll need to pay an unbelievable tremendous price, and with just the slightest carelessness, you will end up dispersing instead. Has the artifact spirit lost his mind? Ziying mocked. He was laughing at how naive the artifact spirit was. The artifact spirit sure has lived a very long time to think of things like that. He'll never succeed as long as Ziying and I are here. And hasn't the fake Anata Grand Prime realized that if she is urging Master on too much, causing doubt to form instead? Qing Sua added scornfully. We still can't confirm whether she's the artifact spirit of the Anata Tower or a fragment of the Grand Prime's disciple's soul. However, I did happen to catch sight of something in the eyes of the fake that was very similar to the artifact spirit. The artifact spirit uses the laws of destruction as well, so I think it's most likely the artifact spirit. I never thought that the artifact spirit would be able to survive after exploding the immortal emperor's essence blood. Jianchen deduced. He then thought about the black pearl he had stored away in a wooden box within his space ring and continued. However, even if the artifact spirit is still alive, he is extremely weak. Otherwise, it'd be impossible for him not to move against me while I was rebuilding my body. It's possible that he's so weak that he can't even deal with my soul, or he can't get through my line of defense. If that's true, we don't have to worry about the artifact spirit at all. He's even weaker than Ziying and me right now, and under the current suppression of the tower, it's basically impossible for the artifact spirit to recover. And even if he recovers some strength after countless years, Master, you will be able to kill him with a flick of your finger by then, Qing Sua snickered. She took joy in the miserable state that the artifact spirit had been reduced to. Jianchen did not think about the artifact spirit too much. Even if he knew that the artifact spirit was still alive, he was unable to find where it was hiding. After all, he had only refined the first layer of the Anata Tower. He only had a vague sense regarding the 2nd to 9th floors, not seeing them as clearly as the 1st floor. Regarding the pearl, it was extremely likely that it would try to take possession of Jianchen, But he did not believe it was where the artifact spirit was hiding either. My top priority is to gain strength. I don't have to fear anything once I am powerful enough, thought Jianchen. He looked at the fortune jade seat and slowly made his way to it before sitting down on it. The seat was only a projection, but Jianchen felt like he was sitting on the real thing. A cool feeling radiated from the seat and permeated his body. Not only did he feel at ease, even the circulation of his chaotic force seemed to speed up. At the same time, a calming presence gushed into his head. At that moment, he seemed to have entered a wondrous state of mind, where he felt like everything was clearing up. The hazy, mysterious laws of the world were actually presented before him clearly, as if he could see the veins of the world. This fortune jade seat really is good. Sitting on it can indeed help people comprehend ways. It has the same effect as comprehension tea. If I cultivate here, my comprehension of the way of the sword will skyrocket, Jianchen thought, but he sighed soon after. It was a pity that the seat was not the real thing, or he could move it out and sit on it every day. At this moment, a gentle force suddenly radiated from the seat. Jianchen felt like he was a tiny boat in the vast ocean before this gentle force, insignificant. He was forcefully pushed off the seat as a vague voice rang through his consciousness. You are not fated. You are unable to obtain my legacy. The voice seemed masculine and feminine at the same time, both young and old. It also sounded like the cries of insects or birds. It seemed to contain all the sounds within the world, and all of them had fused together to form one voice. This is the Enata Grand Prime's voice. Jianchen's expression changed slightly as he stood before the seat. Surprise and doubt flooded his face as he closely recalled the voice that had just appeared in his soul. A while later, a gleam of light flashed across Jianchen's eyes. He sat on the seat once again. He was not interested in the Enata Grand Prime's legacy at all since he cultivated the chaotic body. Even if the Enata Grand Prime's cultivation method was heaven-defying, it was unsuitable for him. What he really wanted was to cultivate on the seat and borrow the powers of the fortune jade to comprehend the way of the sword. However, the same thing happened. In less than 10 seconds after sitting down, the gentle force appeared once again and pushed him off. You are not fated. You are unable to obtain my legacy. The Enata Grand Prime's voice rang in Jianchen's head once again. It was hard to distinguish whether it was masculine or feminine, but it was impossible to discern the age of the speaker. It possessed all the sounds of the world, having become a type of law itself. It could reach the souls of people. Can't I just cultivate there? Jianchen was unsettled. He was left staring at such a great treasure before him, yet he was unable to use it, which filled him with regret. The fortune jade seat was just a projection, but it would still bring extremely great benefits while comprehending the ways of the sword, just like comprehension tea. He did not have many comprehension tea leaves left, and each leaf only gave him an extremely limited period of time to spend comprehending the mysteries of the laws. On the other hand, the seat before him was not limited by time, allowing him to comprehend for as long as he wished. Jianchen clenched his teeth. He did not want to give up. He sat on the seat once again, but this time, he only used it as a cushion. He sealed off all his senses, preventing him from sensing the wonders within the seat, hoping he would not be kicked off. This was because the cool presence from the seat would still enter his body as long as he sat on it. In the end, he was unable to last more than 3 seconds, to his disappointment, even when he treated it as a seat. The voice rang in his head a third time, and this time, it was as loud as a great bell. It caused his soul to shake and was aggressive. Jianchen did not give up. He thought of all the ideas he had and sat on the seat again. Less than 10 seconds later, he was pushed off by the gentle force again, and he immediately paled. The fourth time the voice rang in his head was thunderous. It jolted his soul violently, causing it to ache as if it was been ripped apart. He suffered slight injuries to his soul. The more I try, the more powerful the voice becomes. If I want to try cultivating on the seat again, the sound will be even more terrifying. It'll be enough to heavily injure my soul or even shake it to pieces. Looks like there's no hope for me to cultivate using this seat. Jianchen stood near the fortune jade seat with a pale face as he stared at it. He sighed inside and left in despair. At the main entrance of the tower, Jianchen raised his head and stared at the structure. When he had come here this time, he had not planned on taking the tower itself. He just wanted to find some treasures, or some of the wealth accumulated by the Anata Grand Prime, so that he could strengthen himself. What he had never thought he would obtain was the ability to refine the first layer of the tower after defeating the artifact spirit. Though he gained nothing more than that. The Anata Grand Prime had indeed left his wealth in the Anata Tower, but it was all stored in a crack in space on the 9th floor. Jianchen was unable to retrieve them with his current strength. The Anata Tower has a total of 9 layers. I've only refined the first layer, so I can only use the basic controls of the structure. I can't even use its power, Jianchen murmured. His voice was filled with helplessness. He extended his hand and watched the tower rapidly shrink. It became the height of a finger and flew into his hand. The sword slashes still remained on the tower, but they had shrunken with the structure. Each slash shone with a bright light. The suppression of the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt still remained. Chapter 1494. Leaving the Sea of Despair, Jianchen stared at the sword slashes that were still present on the surface on the Anata Tower and said with a deep voice, "I have confirmed that the artifact spirit did not pass away from the explosion created by the immortal Emperor's essence blood. Since he's still around, I can't break the seal on the tower even if I had the ability to. Once the suppression from the seal is gone, the artifact spirit will be able to recover rapidly, surpassing my own growth rate." Jianchen removed the wooden box with the black pearl from his space ring after some silence. With a thought, he placed the wooden box inside the Anata Tower. He felt like leaving it in the Anata Tower was safer and worried that something might happen someday if he carried it with him. He still did not understand the use of the pearl. Possession was only one of his and the sword spirit's guesses. At the same time, he did not want to test the effects of the pearl either. He understood that testing them would only be detrimental. Thus, testing it was pointless. I may not be able to use the power of the Anata Tower right now, but it's a fated god artifact of the Anata Grand Prime after all. It's created from rare items of the world. Even if it can't display any powers at all, just the weight of the tower is probably enough to flatten a planet. Jianchen's lips gradually curled into a smile as he stared at the finger-sized tower in the center of his hand. He did not obtain what he wanted from this journey, which filled him with some pity, but he felt like it was worth the trip just for the Anata Tower. Even if the Anata Tower had no special abilities, just the weight of it would not be something a receival expert could withstand. Jianchen had refined the first layer, hence gaining access to the basic controls, which was why it was as light as a feather in his hands. However, once it left his side, it would become extremely heavy. He had no doubt that the tower could crush receival experts to death. With a thought, the tower immediately disappeared from Jianchen's hand. An imprint that seemed the same as the Anata Tower appeared in the center of Jianchen's hand. It was exquisitely designed and seemed like a birthmark. He originally could have fused it into his soul, but Jianchen did not plan on doing that before he had completely refined it. The risks were just too great. Jianchen reluctantly glanced at the flat region one last time before leaving. The way back was also extremely difficult. Jianchen had no idea how long he had been wandering in the endless mist, let alone the number of times he had been teleported away. In the end, he found his way out by luck, leaving the disorienting Sea of Despair. The endless mist within the Sea of Despair did not vanish with the disappearance of the Anata Tower. It churned just like before. Jianchen did not remain outside the Sea of Despair for long. He immediately shot into the sky, leaving the sea realm in just a single moment. With a huge splash, he emerged from the sea and rushed into the blue sky. He then transformed into a violet streak of light and instantly flew away, moving extremely quickly. Flame City was bustling. All the streets and alleyways were filled with people and activities. Carriages filled with goods rolled down the wide streets as burly mercenaries accompanied the vehicles in orderly fashions, coming in and out of the city. Even though mercenaries of various places had gathered in the city, causing it to become a mixture of strong and weak, there had never been any cases of violence within the city. The current Flame City was no longer as simple as the headquarters of the Flame Mercenaries. From a certain aspect, it had already replaced Mercenary City, becoming a holy land to all mercenaries on the Tianyuan continent. Although Flame City could not compare to the past Mercenary City in terms of heritage, that did not affect its supreme status among the mercenaries of the continent. This was because the city lord of the city was the greatest human expert, Jian Qin. He was a supreme existence on the Tianyuan continent, fully deserving the title of sovereign. The vice city lord, Bai Lian, had become a famed figure on the Tianyuan continent long ago as well. Even the magical beasts, the 100 races and the sea race had heard rumors about her. A violet streak of light tore through the sky above the city. It vanished in the blink of an eye, having arrived in the city lord's estate already. The violet light moved just too quickly and soundlessly. Coupled with how it was daytime, there were very few experts who sensed the arrival of the light in the city. Bai Hai snapped open his eyes as he cultivated in a secret room. A smear of pride appeared on his face, and he murmured, "After having gone missing for around a dozen years, my grandsons finally returned." Throughout these years, basically everyone in the world has been discussing whether a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master can revive Saint weapons or not. I'm curious as well, but I can finally find out. Bai Hai stood up and left the room with a smile. Brothers returned. Bai Lian and Yu sensed Jian Chen's return in a moment as they strolled through the gardens. They were immediately pleasantly surprised, and in a flash they left. They hurried over as quickly as they could. It had been around a dozen years since Jian Chen had last appeared. Back when he had become a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master, he completely vanished after taking the large pile of saint weapons. He faded out of sight. He was only seen by Tai Ta, the sea goddess, and the other few Origin Realm experts during the second invasion from the world of Forsaken Saints. At the same time, Du Gufeng, Yun Zheng, Senior, and Jeditai, and other members of the upper echelon all put down what they were handling at the time and immediately rushed to the main discussion hall to meet Jian Qin. Jian Qin did not sit on the city lord's throne within the hall and instead stood silently in the center of the room. He did not radiate a presence at all, making him seem like an ordinary person. 2 rows of elite soldiers kneeled to his left and right in black armor. Every single one of them was no weaker than a Heaven Saint Master. 2 of them were Saint Rulers. Chapter 1495. Secret of the Saint Weapons. During this past era of peace, Saint Rulers were hermit experts who rarely appeared before people even after centuries. Yet, there were 2 Saint Rulers, wearing armor forged from tungsten alloy, kneeling respectfully like guards. They did not even dare to breathe too loudly. If this had happened in the past, it would have been enough to shock countless people. Even right now, while the Tianyuan continent faced the threat of the foreign world, Saint Rulers still possessed an extraordinary status after both Saint Kings and Saint Emperors had all emerged. To get a Saint Ruler to kneel willingly was virtually impossible. Even Saint Emperors would not be able to achieve such a feat. However, Jian Qin now possessed enough prestige for Saint Rulers to kneel for him. Let alone Saint Rulers, even a few Saint Kings who admired him could not help but bend their prideful legs and yield to Jian Qin. This was not because they had no pride. Rather, what they felt was admiration for the powerful. Not to mention the fact that Jian Qin was the only human to have surpassed Saint Emperor since Mo Tianyun. Yang Lai, Gui Hai Dao, and Feng Xiaotian could not be considered people of the Tianyuan continent, and when they had come down from the saints' world, their cultivation had fallen to Saint Emperor as well, unable to recover even now. As a result, the 3 of them could only be considered half an Origin Realm expert. They were not true Origin Realm experts. "You can all rise," Jian Qin gently said to the 2 rows of people. His gaze was filled with mixed emotions. He could not help but think of a moment in the past when he had been forced to remain in Mercenary City because of the Saint Rulers who were hunting him down. At that time, Saint Rulers were indomitable existences in his eyes. He did not even have the power to fight back or flee before them. Yet now, he had become an existence that Saint Rulers would admire. This filled him with amazement. "Yes, sir." The 2 rows of guards courteously replied together. Only then did they slowly rise and step to the side while breathing quietly. The 2 saint rulers would glance at Jianchen from time to time, mad devotion filling their faces. The 2 of them were not originally a part of the Flame Mercenaries, but many people had joined over the past dozen years due to their admiration for Jianchen. They then become the guards of the discussion hall in the city lord's estate. To them, being able to hold such a position was a great honor. They viewed the job with pride. This was because this hall was the place where the fate of the entire Flame Mercenaries could be determined, a place that could influence the entire Tianyuan continent. This was because the important meetings of the Flame Mercenaries were all held in the discussion hall. Every guard was overwhelmed by indescribably joy when they saw Jianchen. Jianchen's name had already reached their ears long ago. They had only seen his sculpture and never him in the flesh. Not only did they manage to see him today with their own eyes, but they were able to interact with him at such a close range. Every single one of them was filled with great excitement. Great-grandson, you went missing for over a dozen years. If you still hadn't returned, the 2 girls would have sent people across the entire continent to search for you. With a clear chuckle, Bai Hai walked in from outside with his 2 hands behind his back. He seemed to be taking a casual stroll, but he crossed several hundred meters with each step. He arrived inside the hall with just a few steps. Brother, you finally returned. Jianchen. As soon as Bai Hai had entered the discussion hall, Bai Lian and Yu Yu's joyful voices rang out. The 2 girls charged in as quickly as they could. They were ecstatic. Afterward, Yun Zheng, Senior, and Wang Yifeng, Dugufeng, Jetta Tai, and a few other members of the upper echelon hurried over from everywhere. They all clasped their hands to Jianchen before quietly standing to a side. Jianchen also smiled when he saw these people. His smile was filled with warmth. My dear great-grandson, how's the revival of the saint weapons been? The entire world's been discussing this for the past decade. There's even quite a few old and powerful people who've come to ask for news, but they've all left disappointed in the end. I'm your great-grandfather after all. Even if you want to hide this from the entire world, you still have to tell me and satisfy me curiosity, Bai Hai chuckled. As Jianchen Sr., he obviously did not need to behave politely and carefully when speaking to Jianchen. Brother, where have been for the past decade? You've made me and Sister Yu worry so much, Bai Lian grumbled while clinging to one of Jianchen's arms. Her voice was filled with blame and satisfaction. Yu stood to one side as she silently stared at Jianchen. She smiled, and in her gentle eyes, tears flashed. Although it had been over a decade, even the weakest of the people present, Bai Lian, was a saint ruler. They all possessed lifespans of several millennia, so such a short amount of time was not enough to leave any marks on them. Everyone looked the same as before, including Bai Lian and Yu. Aside from everyone being more mature and steady-minded, there were no significant changes. Jianchen greeted everyone and asked how they were doing before telling them about the flaw regarding the revival of saint weapons. He could sense that it would not be long until the 3rd battle against the world of Forsaken Saints, so there was no longer any need to hide the flaw anymore. Telling everyone would instead boost their confidence and morale. Everyone in the discussion hall fell silent when they learned about the flaw of the revived saint weapons. Even Bai Hai silently frowned. On the Tianyuan continent, many people left behind saint weapons when they passed away. Aside from helping their clansmen, many people did due to the slightest possibility of being revived. Even though the chances were insignificant, there were still many people who left behind their saint weapons without any hesitation just to gamble on a second life. However, what none of them could have known was that they would be turned into mindless puppets after being revived and that they would be controlled by the person who had revived them. If all of them had learned that this would be the outcome of their second life, would there have been so many people willing to leave behind their saint weapons to be controlled as puppets? When experts at the 9th heavenly layer did not leave behind their saint weapons, they made the choice to destroy them in their final moments of life. After all, not everyone had clans. There were many independent cultivators as well. Sigh, I never thought that the revived saint weapons would turn out like this. I can imagine that there will be fewer and fewer saint weapons on the Tianyuan continent in the future if this matter makes it out to the public. Bai Hai sighed after quite a long while. His emotions were extremely mixed. Chapter 1496. A Young Death in Longevity Valley. If we can't make it through the invasion of the foreign world, would there even be a future? In my opinion, the fact that revived saint weapons have been reduced to puppets is not necessarily a bad thing under these circumstances. Their strength may have decreased, but they also possess advantages that we don't. They can't feel pain or fear. They know nothing even before death. These suicide soldier-like puppets will be of unimaginably great uses in a few special situations, and over the past few years, Yang Lai, Feng Xiaotian, and Gui Haidao have been passing on formations to all the Saint Emperors of the 4 races. If Saint Emperors use these formation, they can trap Origin Realm experts or gain far more strength than what they originally possessed by paying a certain price. These formations are more than suitable for these Saint Emperor puppets, said Dugufeng. He was emotionless and spoke rather coldly, as if his determined face had never smiled before. Bai Hai's eyes immediately lit up because of what Dugufeng said. He added, "You're right. If Saint Emperors burn their lives to use the powerful formations, they won't be able to surpass the peak of Saint Emperor, but some powerful existences can reach the peak of Saint Emperor. Since these puppets have no self-awareness, their former lives will be humiliated if they continue like this, but they will be able to shine one last time in the next battle against the foreign world, protecting our home with the current generation." Jian Chen silently nodded. He sank into his thoughts. He had known long ago that Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian were responsible for passing on a few formations to the Saint Emperors as well as personally guiding them through the usages of the various formations. Jian Chen also knew a few formations from higher worlds. He had learned all these sword formations from the sword spirits, so even though they were the weakest from the higher realms, they were still much more powerful than the formations that Feng Xiaotian and the others knew. Casting these formations was extremely difficult, and even Jian Chen might not possess the power to use them. This was not only due to his lack of strength, but also because the sword formations were just far too profound. He needed some time to completely understand them. Looks like I should go check on great-grandfather Yang Lai and learn the formations from him so that these puppets can use them, Jian Chen thought. He then dismissed everyone from the discussion hall. Only Bai Hai, Bai Lian Yuyu, and Dugufeng remained. He then took out the saint artifact and let out Bai Yuntian, who was cultivating inside. Bai Yuntian had spent over a decade in the artifact space cultivating. She improved at an otherworldly rate. Although it was nowhere near as fast as Jian Chen's cultivation rate, she would be considered as a rare genius across the entire continent. She had already reached the peak of the 6th class and was currently making preparations to reach the 7th class. Jian Chen failed to see newbies, Ming Dong, or Little Fatty in the discussion hall. However, he did not ask about them. Instead, he expanded the senses of his soul, enveloping the entire city in a single moment. He extended his senses deep underground to the secret rooms but failed to find them there, so he continued to spread his soul even further without any hesitation, enveloping the entire continent. His soul had even reached into the vast ocean. The wind whistled and waves roared in the ocean. Huge waves that were several dozen meters tall would be kicked up from time to time. A huge sea beast currently rode through the waves. Its body was extremely stable and would not tremble at all no matter how violent the waves were. A young man in golden robes lay on the huge sea beast. He held a jug of alcohol as he constantly took a sip from it in satisfaction. 2 burly women, who seemed to be in their 20s, knelt beside him, carefully massaging his legs and back while full of polite fear. The 2 women did not possess striking appearances. Even though they behaved fearfully before the golden-robed young man, their fear was still not enough to conceal their toughness. The powerful presence that belonged to Saint Rulers leaked out from them. The 2 women were clearly Class 7 magical beasts that had assumed human form. Now this is life. I can go wherever I want. It's no longer like the past where I couldn't enter the territory of humans and always needed to keep myself hidden, avoiding that old snake on the beast god continent with my life hanging on a line all the time. I came close to death so many times after going to the sea realm with Jianchen, almost making it impossible for me to see the light of day ever again. The young man sipped his alcohol as he muttered to himself. Reminiscence flooded his face, along with some longing. He was newbies. But I gotta say that the days I spent with Jianchen are really much more interesting than anything I ever did before. In just a few short decades, I went from being a Class 7 magical beast to being a Class 9. This was all because I made an extremely smart decision in the past. If I had chosen to keep hiding in that cave, I probably wouldn't have reached the 8th class yet, Newbies said proudly before glancing at the two women beside him. He sniggered. Do the two of you know who Jianchen, who I, the great Newbies, mentioned is? We know. Of course we know. Even we have heard of Sovereign Jianchen's great name. We're filled with admiration for him. It's just that we're filled with regret over how we have never caught a glimpse of him, the two burly women added. Their eyes were filled with deep admiration. Since you've become my servants, I'll obviously fulfill that small wish of yours. You will naturally get a chance to catch a glimpse of my brother in the future, Newbies said proudly. However, a vague voice rang in his head as soon as he finished speaking. Newbies, come to Flame City immediately. Newbies was stunned. The next moment his eyes shone brightly. Without any hesitation he immediately stood up and ripped open space, creating a space gate. You two go back to the island and wait there. Newbies spoke the moment he passed through the space gate. Not only had Jianchen found Newbies with his soul, but he had also found Ming Dong and Little Fatty. However, his emotions became sorrowful. Currently, the two of them were in Longevity Valley. The entire place was filled with sorrow, and all the villagers there were wearing white. Their faces were filled with anguish. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.